up, everybody at home and listening on the replay and so forth? Hey, Nate, how you doing? All right, this is the third of part 3 for Ragnarok in the Dimensionality sub-series, and it's going to be great. I don't always say that. Sometimes I say I don't know how this is going to turn out. Often those turn out the best when I don't know. But anyhow, can't overhype this stuff, right? We know it always delivers, or at least delivers often enough that you want to watch out for it. All right, let me switch here to my slide. All right, some of you might have Jesus talked about it, and I think it's in our culture in different places, right? The idea of a wide path that leads to destruction or a narrow path in success culture and just in everyday life. Pretty much everyone also has this idea about do I give up or do I fight? Right? Do I just like the idea of, and so mostly the thing I have to the right here, that what I'm going to call the fat path or winning, generally that's what I mean by that is not even, it's invisible. It's not part of the equation. It's a false choice in people's minds between following the crowd, being a sheep or being a something else, right? Fighting, being a warrior or a wolf or a fighter, persisting and so forth. Of course, persistence the right way is a good thing. But so it's deep in our psyche and in virtually every culture that I'm aware of that is pretty much one of those two things. And this Ragnarok series is about a fundamentally awesome way to look at the basic question of life, right? How do I succeed? How do I be happy? Who am I? Why are we here? How do I know what's true? It's all one question, right? What's going on? What's my power, right? My personal power. How do I maximize my power? All those again are the same question. And even the question of personal improvement or maybe misnamed, but personal growth and so forth. It all comes down to the same, it's all the same thing, whether people realize it or not, or to whatever degree that they uncover that people touch on the basic question here and there, but then they tend to give up, right? Or get false closure or something. So the basic idea of Ragnarok is only remove failure conditions until you win. Today, I'm going to give you a great whole mental model that's going to be pretty much burned into your mind. I think this fat path mental picture that I'll describe, I think you'll never forget it for the rest of your life after this webinar. It's a kind of a hard thing to forget, right? Because we already probably have something like the wide path versus the narrow path, right? Something like that, either that exact phrasing or intuitively feel that or something, right? Where there's like a wide path in life that leads to mediocrity or destruction or being a sheep or mass hypnosis, whatever, however it's represented. And then there's often an alternative or a way to struggle and fight. And often it's not presented even like that, but if you watch a movie where there's some kind of plan, right? Or there's just like a hero, in most cases, they find like this, it's not just a narrow path, but it's like this narrow twisting path that to victory, the clever and often fast, right? And so forth. But the thing about that narrow path, if you watch a James Bond movie or the A-Team remake, right? I love the TV show and I enjoyed the movie, but the plan at the end was extremely convoluted and just full of all kinds of failure conditions. And you just see that very commonly, right, in stories and movies where the plan that looks clever on retrospect when it's in a movie and it succeeds just had all sorts of failure conditions, right? Like James Bond, by the time he wins, he had to pretty much get lucky a zillion times and rely on specialized talents I don't know where he came up with them, right? And just the right gadget from Q, right, and so forth in order, or else he would have died like several times per movie. And I totally like James Bond, but you get my point. In real life, we want to have a new way of looking at things where what I've found and what I've duplicated in my life and to a large degree helping others as well with strategy is there's a path that is either blocked by an illusionary wall where we think that we're going to just slam into a wall. Like there's something blocking us from seeing it, or it's just, there's not necessarily an illusionary wall, but it's invisible. There's something we're not seeing that if we did see or realize, then it's easy and wide and it leads to victory. Like you've pretty much already won once you find a fat path. And then it's just a matter of when I say win, then attack. The attacking part after you win is you just follow the fat path. And there might be motion involved in doing stuff. And you might need to pay a bit of attention and be a little bit competent. But at the point where you've identified it, then you are pretty much inevitably going to win by just continuing forward in a way that's going to seem easy and be easy and lead to victory. And if this was just a theory, it might seem too good to be true, but I'm going to give you, I have a whole bunch, I have one of my slides has just a whole bunch of examples that I'll quickly run through for you. And it's just over and over again. There's a slide that I showed you, I think it was in the first dimensionality, it might have been in the second, I'm sorry, might have been the second one, but one of those two. And I said, because part of what we want to see is why people miss this whole concept of the fat path and why they miss it specifically in so many areas of life. Even if they happen to find it in one area of life or a couple, people still don't realize this. We'll want to, something you constantly see me doing is going meta, where I make sure to apply these great ideas to the idea itself, right? Like, for example, if understanding is important, then what's the first thing we want to do? We want to understand understanding itself, right? Similarly with the fat path, we want in life the existence of the fat path that you're going to apply to specific areas of life and topics and endeavors. The meta idea of the fat path is like the fat path in life. When you see and understand and master the idea of the fat path, so the fat path, finding the fat path and being on it in life becomes fat in and of itself, right? It's your kind of go-to thing, then you're all set, right? So we want the fat path to the fat path. And that's what we'll be talking about ultimately, like in this webinar, is understanding the fat path, right? And again, the fat path to the fat path, not to be confused with the default wide original path that people follow by default, that most people do. So I put this slide up and I said, because one of the huge illusions that's constantly messing us up is some form of nearness. And that most commonly that ends up, or at least very commonly, there might be physical nearness with people around us and what they are doing and thinking and what they feel like is important. A big place that illusions come from. And then the other is with time. And especially people are constantly in a rush, including if someone decides they don't want to be in a rush, then the first thing they'll do is screw the meta up and they'll be in a rush to not be in a rush. If I say don't be in a rush with money, then people will be like, okay, so how do I get there? I want to not be in a rush with money and I want that right away. So I've also talked about how the outer frame by default is set by our gray area thinking, by our associative type of thinking that is fraught with error. The gray area process is appropriate within a gray area, but it definitely needs to not set the frame for your life overall. And then even for your various endeavors, you set the frame through black and white thinking. You never need to have the frame set through gray area. And so when someone ends up being in a rush to not be in a rush, for example, with not being in a rush with money, right? They'll be in a rush to not be in a rush with. So the frame, even if you point out a good idea, which is to not be in a rush with things, then people are so used to the outer frame not paying attention to it that the outer frame gets set by their default associative gray area thinking, right? And they're still in a rush. They're in a rush to not be in a rush. They want to quickly stop trying to get results fast. And it turns out what I said here on this slide in the beginning of dimensionality pointed to what I'm talking about today, which is that there's constantly an easy path, but we certainly need to distinguish it between the path of least resistance, right? The wide path that leads to destruction or mediocrity or being a sheep, etc. Right? Obviously, merely going with the flow and being normal in our world is not going to lead to where we want, right? Of course, people are not overall successful and happy to a very high degree or to a perfect degree, right? They certainly make all sorts of errors and are arrogant with those errors and protect the errors, right? So that's very common, and that means it's going to be common in our own mind, right? And so obviously the default path isn't what we want. But the one way you can spot the wide path that leads to destruction is that the nearness makes it the wide path that leads to destruction is it looks good. It seems right in the short term, whatever that might be, right? You're married, you see someone, you feel like you want to have an affair with them and circumstances make it possible and it seems right in the short term, right? It's near, the person's standing there nearby, it's near in time. And so obviously if you carry it forward and through, whether it's really going to be worth it, it probably won't be, right? And probably won't even be close, right? If you carry it forward, just an example of what I'm talking about. None of my examples are something that I'm trying to preach about or get harped on. I'm just using the example to illustrate what I'm talking about. So the wide path versus the fat path, right? It's the thing that's going to seem right off the bat. But then if you think it through, you're going to end up off a cliff, right? Snapping at somebody, reacting in a way, right? That in the short term feels good or feels like justice or showing them how you feel, right? Or whatever. It's possible such a thing might be a proper response, but only if you figure out that it is, right? Not if it's just the first thing that seems right. So one shortcut to everything is if we learn how to let go of fast and nearness overall, which is it's going to be counterintuitive for a while. Now, maybe you've already gotten there from all the other stuff I've talked about, but you're not going to get there in one leap. And if you think you can, then you're falling for fast again, fast and arrogant, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, I'm already there. I just an act of will. I've decided, right? Be very suspicious of fast. It doesn't mean I don't try to go slow ever. You just want to ignore nearness. Of course, things that are near in time or near you physically are sometimes important, right? So again, I'm not looking for the thing that like in China, right? It's the farthest thing on earth physically from me, approximately, maybe some other country, but I'm not looking there and ignoring everything happening in my town, right? It's not that, again, slow isn't the answer. It's just ignoring nearness altogether and looking at impact when it comes to importance. Or just what you'll find with the fat path is that it's going to stay hidden from you if you can't let go of near, right? The failure, what we talk about overall, what's our overall heuristic way of operating is to remove failure conditions, right? Until you win. And probably the biggest, or at least a major failure condition with finding the fat path, the easy and safe and reliable way. I talk about inevitable success consistently, right? What am I talking about? The fat path. Right? I talk about win first, then attack. Same thing. The fat path where semi-soft blocks, if you've heard me talk about that, where you figure out a building block on the way to your overall goal, where if you really focus, you could definitely reach it. And then once you reach it, if you're competent, then you'll certainly get to the rest of your goal. If you can identify something like that, right? Just as a very quick review, if you've already heard me talk about semi-soft block. All of those things point to this fat path. But to see it, we need to do, as always, right? Finding the fat path is an example of winning, right? Not necessarily winning for the rest of your life overall, where you never have to do anything else, but winning regarding a particular endeavor. And then as a subset of any kind of endeavor or goal that has revealed itself, you want to find the fat path to it, right? The path to the win. So finding the fat path is a meta example of winning. And therefore, you want to do, as always, right? The Ragnarok idea of remove failure conditions until you win. So you find the fat path by, I'll go back to this slide now. No, let me make sure I read this, what's on here. But you find the fat path, as always, by what? By removing failure conditions that would keep you from identifying the fat path. If you're in a rush to have found the fat path, that's, again, one of your primary failure conditions, as it is with anything. You're looking for something that's reliable. The fat path is reliable. It's inevitable success. The wide path is when you think it through and look, it's going to be inevitable failure, right? Even if some or a lot of people fail on a path that you can see, then it must not be the fat path, right? It doesn't have to be everybody fails. Just because you can find some examples of some people that do things a certain way, send their kid to school, and those kids are not failures, or not, at least by traditional standards, or a particular diet that isn't effective, but some people will still be on it and be skinny and look and be in shape, right? Or a particular money-making scheme, right? Any one of these conversion funnel type of plan that you'll find, there's going to be some people that'll be successful with it. That is not the way to identify the fat path, is just because some people succeed. Just 1% of people succeeding, and you can't know the percentage, right? Just a few people succeeding at something has nothing to do with reliability. It certainly proves that it's possible, unless they're falsifying something or they cheated in some way, right? Which is possible as well, right? So it proves that it's possible, or at least possible to fake it or fake. But it's not an indication of reliability. So you want to remove that as one of your ways of buying the fat path, just because other people have succeeded. Or this person's very successful and is telling me to do it. They might be telling you the fat path, but they might not, right? It's just not reliable. That's not your indicator. So the fat path should be very reliable. It's like when you're driving, right? An accident typically takes approximately 3 conditions all at once happening, right? Like hazardous road conditions, either like dark or stormy or slippery, or just a hazardous road condition could be fine weather, but the way the road is laid out, it's been easy to have an accident there, some kind of merge or odd counterintuitive turn or something like that. And then someone is a little distracted or tired or whatever, right? Or being aggressive. And then bad luck, right? Like a car doing something that is predictable or common, right? So bad luck, some sort of distraction or lack of alertness and defensiveness or aggression on the part of a driver, and then hazardous road conditions. Account, and again, I'm not getting bogged down in any particular example. Obviously, I'm not teaching how to drive, right? But it's a great illustration of, in order to reliably not get in an accident, like a wide path is like you're driving with attentiveness down a road that inherently is pretty safe, right? Could then, even if there's bad luck, the safety of the road conditions and your attentiveness and defensive driving is going to make an accident virtually impossible, right? That's reliable. That's like a romantic relationship can be that way, right? Almost anything can be that way, but just as another quick example, right? Where a difficult issue can come up between you and your romantic partner, right? You might overall have a great relationship, but there might be just a particular topic that's rough on one of you, or a particular tone of voice that one of you uses that triggers the other, and so forth. But if overall you are on a fat path with your relationship, then one issue, or even an issue coming up from time to time, right? Bad luck can happen, or an odd car behavior can happen on a road, to go back to my other illustration of the driving, every hour during a 10-hour drive. But if you're attentive and defensive and the road itself has safe conditions, then each and every time you can avoid the accident, and probably by a lot, right? So the fat path will be reliable, and it's easy in the sense of, again, we can see this with the driving, where you have to be attentive. So it's not easy in the sense that you can be aggressive or inattentive when you're driving and not get in an accident. But it's easy in the sense that each and every time there's kind of a bad luck or an odd car situation where, they're turning into the same lane that you might be, or it's a tough, or whatever it might be, that it's easy to avoid the accident, right? So easy doesn't mean automated. It means you're competent, you're paying attention, but given that you are, same thing in a romantic relationship, right? Something can get triggered that's difficult, but in a sense, it's easy to not have that really wreck the relationship, right? Or even wreck more than an hour or two or whatever it might be, or 5 minutes. See, so easy given that you're paying attention. Not easy given that you could just fall asleep or be reckless. Not easy like it's done for you, like it's a magic pill easy. That's not the kind of easy I'm talking about. I'm talking about like easy to avoid getting wrecked, easy to avoid failure through competence and attentiveness, but not through being James Bond, where you're presented with a new game or an obstacle course or high-speed chase on skis, and all of a sudden you're the world's best skier, right? You don't need to be that, right? You don't need to come up with the perfect thing to say to your romantic partner just to not, that you don't even have any idea, but you have to figure it out in the moment. That sort of thing is not easy, right? You don't need to be super clever and get through a really narrow, difficult situation. That's not easy. And that would be an indication that you're on the narrow, precarious path of struggling and fighting that might lead to a better place and better rewards than the wide path that lead to destruction or mediocrity, right? So there's all kinds of stories of people fighting and struggling and coming out with something worthwhile or winning in a certain sense or whatever, right? Making a bunch of money, but then there's a lot of roadkill, right? And it's not, you don't want your plan to be, I'm going to constantly, brilliantly walk this narrow ledge, right? Or narrow twisting path and figure out just how it is, just how to get through it. So you want it to be easy in the sense of, if you're competent, you're not going to fail and you're paying attention, and then reliable. But the trick is to totally let go of nearness and fast, achieving it fast. If it's reliable and easy if you're paying attention and competent. If you drive reasonably defensively and you stick to roads that are reasonably safe, right, then you're going to get to your destination in plenty fenced, right? I'm not saying go drive 20 miles an hour or even drive the speed limit, right? You can drive 10 miles over the speed limit and be totally attentive, safe, reliable, easy, right, with traffic and so forth. You'll get there plenty fast. And I constantly achieve results plenty fast, right? So none of it is about going slow or extra slow. It's just ignoring that. Okay, back to my original slide here. The two things on top, the give up versus fight, in parentheses, versus winning, right? This is another restatement of that. And that's what I've meant when I've talked about that, is we want to, again, just understand and learn and master the meta of the fat path, understanding how to find and follow and expect fat path. I believe in the fat path. In other words, I act on the fat path existing. I don't act as if I'm already on it, right? First, I look for it. Acting as if you're already on it is just you're on the wide path, fooling yourself, right? I already said this line here, the fat path, but I'll just read it. The fat path is hidden by an illusionary wall and or the entrance is invisible until revealed, right? That's one of the features of the fat path, is that it's not immediately obvious generally in life. Of course, if it checks out, if it's clearly a fat path, right, in an easy and reliable way, again, easy if you're attentive, right? So you won't misinterpret what I mean by easy if you take attentive or reasonably competent in with easy. Anyone where they're selling you something and they're like, it's all done for you. You take the magic pill and everything just happens automatically. That's not the fat, right? So don't confuse that. Easy, like done for you, easy automated, easy you can go to sleep or be reckless is not the easy I'm talking about. It's a good way to distinguish. But there's going to be some reason why everyone's not following it, right? There's fat paths. Let me point this out. There's fat path that everyone follows. Everybody eat. They don't just starve themselves to death. In that case, right, because it's not hidden by anything. It's easy for you, given that there's food available to you, to not starve to death. It's easy for you not to murder your friends, right? Which is helpful, right? That's a way that, right? And you're way better off by not just wantonly murdering your friends or even strangers that you don't know, right? That have nothing to do with you or hurting you or anything. And so it's useful to note that there's plenty of fat paths that are revealed, that are easy to see. And when you follow them, we just don't think about them because they're obvious, they work, great, right? Like you get some amount of sleep, right? Things like that. The human race is so that we keep surviving, right? People keep having kids and they pay attention to the kids on the whole, right? And they breed with people with immune systems differently typically than themselves because those people smell better, all sorts of, right, built in. So again, there's lots of existing fat paths that are not hidden, right? But they're not very relevant except for if I didn't point that out to you, then you might get confused with what I'm talking about. By realizing that there's plenty of fat paths that exist that are not hidden. But then in life, there's obviously plenty of either life is fundamentally about struggling and potentially losing and getting taken out, right? If your only alternatives are to struggle or to often get destroyed, right? Like the wide path. So when I talk about a wide path, that's part of my definition of that is it leads to reliable failure, or like the end result is reliably not good. That's the difference between an obvious fat path, like keeping yourself fed, so you don't just fully starve to death. I'm not talking about eating great or not. I'm just saying not starving to death is a fat path that's obvious, right? That is fine. Now, on the other hand, eating in a healthy fashion where you don't do things that end up biting you in the butt when you're 60 or 70 earlier or 40 even, right, or whatever. That's not obvious, right? Because we look around and plenty of us don't eat in a way that we suspect that it's not optimal. So when we see that, so not starving to death is obvious. Eating in a way that's healthy is not obvious. And normally people, and all this is examples, right? Again, I'm not teaching about the examples themselves, right? I'm explaining this meta idea using an example. So I'm not preaching about diet or food, but clearly the wide path with eating does not lead to much helpfulness. And the narrow path doesn't seem to be working that great either because all kinds of there's all kinds of struggles that don't work out very well and the narrow path inherently doesn't work very well because it's a narrow path that's fraught with anything that's fraught with struggle. Struggle means you could fail all the time, right? You're always this close to falling off the cliff or falling off the tightrope. With most diets, you're struggling, right? Like it's hard to stick to it. So that's not what I look for, right? I look for something is blocking, there's some illusion that we're not seeing, there's some distinction that we're missing, or there's a couple of them that have to be put together, right? An example, when I talk about individual property rights, that's a fat path to the extent that people get it towards a good understanding of when to be violent or about in government or some form of government, or maybe it's not exactly government, right? But something where we understand how to deal with when to be violent with other people, or that's what government's about, when to be violent with other people, fundamentally, right? And that's not an opinion. That's what government is. And again, that's not me railing against it. That's just literal, just logic. So the thing that people don't realize is that individual property rights, and that's the illusion. People don't see that it matters. They get confused about it, right? And so there's this constant struggle. Whenever you see a constant struggle, obviously like in America or other places, there's this struggle to have a government that works well for people, right? It's not oppressive or tyrannical or inefficient or leads to a bad economy or whatever. When you see a struggle, interestingly enough, it doesn't even matter that much, practically speaking, whether you give up or fight in a particular situation. Like people that don't realize there's that path or the win overall, they get really caught up in, do I fight or do I give up, or how do I fight? And it takes up all their attention. Or other people might say, well, fighting is bad, right? But then if the only alternative is giving up, then that's not very helpful just to say don't fight. But ironically, it mostly doesn't matter that much, right? Success isn't about fighting versus giving up. Ironically, it doesn't, in a moment, if you need to struggle or else have something bad happen, then it really doesn't, again, it doesn't really matter in the moment. But if you're not in a rush, which you shouldn't be overall, right? Ultimately, even if you are in a rush, that's okay. If there's something that you have to rush about for a good reason, then you just go meta and say, good, I want to get out of a situation where realistically I have to rush right now, right? But I need to make money before rent's due, right? Or I need to do this task before my spouse comes home or they're going to get angry at me, right? Or beat me or something, right? Happens. Then, or just in your own head, you just feel like you have to rush, right? For something you committed to do something and you need to get it done, right? You committed to a client, you go do something. Then you can't just let go of rushing, right? That again, maybe you can, but then if giving up versus struggling, do you struggle and get stuff done for your client like you promised, even though you have to rush and you're not sure how to do it? Or do you let go and just call them and tell them I can't do it on time? It doesn't really matter. You can eyeball it. And in a particular situation, maybe it's pretty obvious that one or the other is better to do. Sometimes it might be pretty obvious that struggling is better. Other times you can drop something. But overall, if you find yourself faced with that or with a child, right? Do I give up and just let them have what they want right now? Or do I fight with them? Do I let them eat this crappy food? Do I fight and try to get them to do something else and deal with the tantrum? If you're doing that with yourself, with a diet, whatever, then you can eyeball it and use your best judgment of the moment, but realize that what you want to be doing overall is looking for the fat pet. That now, you're not going to spot it if you're in a rush. So remember, if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, wow, I must not have found the fat path here because it's constant, either I'm struggling or I feel like I'm giving up, right? Then you can't just say, what's the fat path? Instead, you say, I need to find the fat. And you might not have time for the next few hours or the next few days or a few weeks to even look for it. Although you can at least have your antenna up. You can pray about it. You can ask your mind the question, whatever combination of those. You can write something in a notebook. What's the fat path for this topic? And you'll find it when you find it, right? Remember, you find the fat path by letting go of the rush, right? But the ultimate answer to success and winning is not going to be found in whether you give up or fight, typically. In the short term, one or the other might be the right answer. So pulling an all-nighter to do what you said you do for a client might be significantly better than just going to sleep and saying, screw it, right? It might be. I'm not saying it always is, but it might be, right? Or the same thing for a test that you might have or no one's really, few people are in school here, but I used to deal with a lot of people that were in school. My previous career was speed learning. So again, eyeballing it, one might be better than the other in a particular situation, but overall, you don't want to think that's all life consists of. And ultimately, your life is not going to depend on whether in a particular instant or overall you give up versus fight. Your life is going to, and success in particular endeavor is generally going to depend on finding the fat path. And then every time you approach an endeavor or a goal or whatever by seeking the fat path and finding it, then what are you doing at the same time? You're getting better at understanding and mastering the meta of finding the fat path. And let me also warn you that reacting to the wide or the narrow path, like alternative stuff, alternative medicine, alternative this, that, or the other thing, homeschooling in and of itself, right? Just not saying, oh, private school, right? Oh, I don't want to send my kid to public school, so I'll send them to private school, right? That's like a narrow path, more of a struggle. You have to pay a lot of money for it. That might be a way better option than public school, but it is not typically going to, again, a narrow path struggle thing is not going to be the ultimate answer. Just homeschooling and trying to duplicate school, right? Like kind of starting, you notice that my point here is that if you let the wide or narrow path situation determine your overall frame, you're just reacting to it, right? If you homeschool, but you're basically just teaching kids what they learn in school and try to do it faster, right? That's not going to be the fat path. Now, not sending your kids to school might be a very good idea that I agree with, but I don't think of it as homeschooling. I just start by, okay, school is not the answer for a whole number of reasons. Definitely. That's obvious. It's beyond obvious to me. It's literally, to me, giving your kids heroin. Maybe 3/4 as bad or half as bad. But giving your kids heroin is like heroin's like a real thing, right? It'll destroy someone's life permanently in most cases. It messes with their sense of importance and so forth, right? And creates an addiction. And the same thing if you send your kids to school, they're going to get addicted to authority. But you might have gotten them hooked on authority even just in your home, right? Because it seems better, but that's the wide path, right? If you teach your kids to obey because you said so, seems so right to so many people. That's what the wide path is. It seems right. What happens, right? What have you noticed that? I think this is pretty much empirically like true. What I'm about to say, it's a little bit of eyeballing it, right? And maybe someone could argue, but it seems as an eyeball, it seems so obvious that in like China and India, they invent like nothing, like relatively speaking, proportionate. America has 300 million people now, right? It's relatively new country. And I'm no person that thinks America's perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not like, I don't think of myself as a patriot. I don't feel like I have pride in America or identify with America. However, individual thinking and lack of respect for authority, relatively speaking, is clearly the case in America versus in like India or China, right? Veneration of your ancestors, respect, in other words, blind obedience to authority and your parents is very strong as far as I understand in India and China. I'm no anthropologist, but again, this is one of those things that seems approximately in a very gross way, averaged out way. Of course, there can be individual exceptions, but the fascinating thing is there hardly are, right? Now, one could say it's cultural bias, but at some point, I don't think it is, right? So many things have been invented in America with 1/4 of the population of India and China. And India and China have been around for thousands of years, as far as I know, right? And so few innovations from there, right? And they have a culture of like copying stuff, right, from America primarily. And if I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong, right? That when I make a kind of a scientific statement like that, I'm using that to illustrate what I'm talking about. Again, I'm not preaching about the example itself. And any one of the examples I'm talking about could theoretically be incorrect. My point doesn't depend on it. But to me, it's so stark, it's stunning. So the wide path of teaching your kids to respect their parents, obey authority, justifying it by saying, well, I have to keep them from going out in the street. They might get hit by a car. Yeah. But as far as I can tell, 90 something percent of what parents order kids to do is not stuff on parallel to getting hit by a car. It's mostly just like to make their life more convenient, right? For the parent. And it's not that I'm not preaching or talking morally here. I'm talking, let's look at the result is you're getting your kid addicted to blind obedience to authority and not just obedient. The obedience is more obvious and that it's more obvious. So it can be a little bit overcome at some point when the kids are teens, then they tend to reject it. But the thing is that what they maintain their addiction to like approval from authority. And so even kids that even go to top schools where their parents really stress this, right? And really stress education. There's all kinds of stats. Oh, in China, or Asians do way better with education, right? Than non-Asians. But they innovate like nothing. I realize that sounds like a very racist statement. But again, just eyeballing, look at just China as a country. I'm okay with talking about cultures. I'm not talking about races. But a culture is a set of ideas and practices and beliefs, right? And ideas can be analyzed. And that's what I'm doing here. And I'm disclaiming it by saying that when I'm doing something like that, I could be wrong. But the meta idea isn't wrong. But anyway, you can see empirically, you get someone addicted to authority. You can just figure out theoretically where it's not just the obedience, it's the approval, and not just the overt approval, but what do they need to know? They need an authority figure to tell them what the goal is. And so kids go to Ivy League schools and it looks like they're doing so well, but they reach a crisis and they need someone, they become more and more afraid of failure. They master and they fight and they struggle in school, and then they're afraid to get outside the box. As far as I know, it's a very real phenomenon with kids that graduate from top schools. They become more and more afraid of failure. They really need someone to tell them what to do because they get so good at being told what to do and then excelling within that. But they need an authority figure to set the frame for them. And that's what I mean by I get them addicted to this authority thing. And it seems obvious to me that's like a wide path that leads to destruction. Right. But it's a very powerful illusion, as far as I can tell. Part of my fat path examples, the problem is the illusion might be so strong that for some people, they think that I'm being ridiculous. Like the illusion, it still remains, right? So you don't see the fat path. You just see like me saying something silly. However, the illusion, but kids need to be taught to obey their parents. They need to respect authority. Do they? What does respect authority mean? Certainly they need to respect property rights and they need to respect other people as equals, right? Like someone else's time, someone else's property is equal to themselves. So respect, meaning respecting people, respect is very important, but respect literally just redefined as blind obedience or needing another person to set a goal and to tell them if they did a good job or not, right? That's not respect. That's like toxic, right? And you can keep your kid from running out in the street and from running around on the pool side, which is also can be deadly, right? And I do, and I'll intervene there. But my child, Chance, my son, he doesn't need to obey me because I'm his parent ever. There's just principles. I've talked about this. I've only needed 2 still. I mentioned it 3 years ago. And I said, I don't know that I'll need more or not, but it turns out I haven't so far. 2 principles where I have to keep him safe, which I don't abuse, right? There's a gray area at some point with keeping him safe. I don't lock him in the closet, right? To keep him safe from everything. But I have to keep him safe, right? When it's reasonable, when it's either black and white, being safe, like walking down the street, or close enough to the border of black and white where I'm not going to let him do it because it's very dangerous, reasonably dangerous. And I'll intervene physically there, but not because I'm his parent ever, right? Why am I right because I'm his parent? Right? Why is he good because I say so? Then he gets addicted to, oh, I'm good because someone tells me I am, because they approve it, right? They get addicted to approval in the wrong way. I'll approve of him. Of course, I don't like withhold approval, but I don't like, if something is good, I'll try to point out why it's objectively good, or at least relative to his own goal that he was trying to do, or helps him in some way that he can see, right? So keep him safe. And of course, individual property rights, respecting people's property. And that explains everything. I don't ever need to revert to I'm right because I'm can beat you up or withhold money or withhold love or approval, whatever. I'm your parent. But that's a powerful illusion. 99.9% of people around the world probably buy into it, right? So it might have been a big example because I might be, yes, in that case, because if I talk about an illusion that seems real, then it doesn't help. But we'll see. We'll see. But I think it's going to be good not to get them addicted to that. All right. Let's get to some more examples here. All right. Prospects and traffic. See, something totally different. Talk about something business. So if you're making money, you typically need prospects. And traffic can be people, it doesn't have to be web traffic, right? It could be any kind of prospects or people that are looking at your offer, right? If you're doing client consulting, then traffic would be, again, like kind of prospect, right? Or people that are one step away from becoming a prospect. like they're available to become a prospect. They're walking by, metaphorically speaking, or just actual web traffic, people visiting your website of any sort. So what is it that people might not see when people think about how do I get prospects, right? I'm talking about business, but just to illustrate something so it's easy to see, when we talk about dating for a second. Let's suppose there's two things here, and they're written right here on the slide, events and connectors, that will really change the game when it comes to getting traffic and prospects and advancing prospects along the relationship that you have with them to where you're able to communicate enough to get them to a decision, which is like sales or conversion, right? Relationship is like traffic, prospects. It's all one concept. So the example of what can make something a fat path and to get you on a fat path with prospects and traffic is these two things, and they can work together, one can lead to the other too, very much. And so one is event. So when it comes to dating, if now a connector would be like actually an online dating service would be a connector, right? Often it's a person, right? But separate from that, in terms of meeting people in real life, separate, and I'm not recommending that or not. Obviously, it's great to be online. I met my wife online. But if we exclude that from a, and we look at it at other ways, so I can explain about events, then what you would want to do that'll make it way easier typically to meet people. One is, of course, you can go to events, right? But if you can also make your own events in addition to going to events, and that'll make it so that when you do go to events, it's easier to further the relationship with people. Because if you only go to events, then it can be a little hard to advance your relationship with people. Of course, in some cases, you meet people and you connect and you can go get coffee, which is a little event, right? Meeting for coffee. That is an event. You're inviting them to the event of you talking about something, right? Over coffee. But the more attractive the event, then the better you're off, right? And the more impressive it is. Of course, you only need to get over the threshold, right? To win, you don't need to get way over the threshold. So you don't need a huge bonanza necessarily in order to get someone to become your client, or to do with dating. But think how much easier it is to meet people in real life and to further your relationship if you hold some event, like at your house. And to make an event work, you often want enough of a seed that there's enough happening, right? You might have a few friends that typically show up, right, at an event. Right? It needs to be good enough that other people respect it and like it and want to be there. But if you get started, you'll develop a mastery of a reasonable type of event. And you can do this online, depending on your business. It isn't necessarily appropriate for client consulting. It could be if you have enough people on an email list, theoretically, or if you get enough prospects online. But online with OMG, it's very relevant, right? We have events, like week-long events where we do stuff, right? That is, interestingly enough, to people that they'll opt in for it, they'll follow it and watch webinars, and where it gives affiliates, people that are going to refer people to us, something to refer people about. They could just say, hey, go buy OMG or go check out OMG. It's awesome. But if there's an event that we have going on, it's much easier for them to refer it, right? Just like it's way easier if you run into a person that you'd like to get to know romantically better, talk to on the way to potentially dating them is what I mean. Then how much easier is it if you can invite them to an event, especially an event that has some life to it all by itself, right? It's a way easier thing. And even if they're a stranger, and this isn't just theory, some people will do this, right? There's a guy, Spear, that taught about this down in Florida, right? That's a friend of Mike's from years ago. And we did stuff we worked on in the relationship and dating niche years ago before doing SEO. Did some launches there, or in parallel to doing some SEO stuff as a separate business. So really start thinking in terms of event, and you can do it. You'll just, like anything, and I'll talk about the mastery process as well. Another thing I want to talk about in this webinar that'll go hand in hand with the fat path. But once you see traffic in terms of inviting them to an event or having them referred, it's also a lot easier for a connector to refer people to you if they're referring people to an event that you hold, rather than just saying, oh, here's his number or her number, right? Or go call them, right? It's a lot easier for them to come check out an event or to attend an event, or be a party, could be a get together, could be a seminar that you hold, whatever, right? Or just a networking meeting, whatever it is. And again, when you go to other people's events, oh, so other people's event, who sets up event? Typically, the person who sets up an event would pretty much have to be a connector, a person who knows people and brings them together. So what's going to make you more of a peer of a connector? Do you think knowing connectors and having a better relationship with them is going to help you with traffic? Heck yeah. There are other ways to get in with a connector, right? Like I got in with Mike Long, who's a connector, without holding a lot of events as far as I remember, right? I had other things that were cool and valuable and intersected with him, and we liked each other and so forth. However, I'd still take advantage of events and have a lot of experience with it online and so, right, that we've done together in our business. But on the whole, if you're the thing with Mike fell into my lap a bit and so forth. But on the whole, again, what's going to make you more of a peer of a connector is if you're holding events, you'll also understand them better, right? And you'll become a little bit of one yourself, and you'll turn yourself into a bit more of a connector by making your own events. And again, it's easier for them to refer people to you, et cetera. So it works together. And those taken together, respecting and valuing connectors, people actually don't value connectors nearly as much as they should in general. I touched on this before, but like with Mike, people tend to take advantage of them in the short term and then not as much in the kind of the long term, or they feel like, all right, they've done their job, or they just don't recognize what they do. So you can value connectors a lot more than people do on the wide part of the fat path to getting prospects and traffic for your life, business, personal life, et cetera, is to value connectors more than people do intuitively. It's hidden how helpful they can be. They might be flamboyant, right? In a way where it's interesting at first, but then it seems to get old if you've known them for a while and you see what looks like their shtick, right? Or whatever. But that's part of how they're a connector, right? So and it's not exactly necessary or not, but it's like something. When you're a connector, you're meeting new people, right? And connecting with them with other people. Like another thing you can think of is an opener, right? It tends to go together, right? Opener, someone who maybe they can be different people, but also you can look for them together. And maybe I could have written the word openers on here as well, right? But openers are often someone that you're initially attracted to, but then over time, their shtick might feel like it gets old to you. But then realize that's just part of their personality and part of what makes them such an effective opener and how you got to know them in the first place. And you can also remember how they were pretty nice to you, whereas most everyone ignored you in life. They didn't, right? And if you reframe that in a negative way, oh, they want attention, blah, blah, blah. No, it's just people have different propensities. They have different talents. They have different personalities, right? And so stupidly, people can look at openers, and again, it often intersects with being a connector, and start to respect it once, because the big value was in the initial open. They talked to you. They were the first person to talk to you when you were at an event, right? But then you see them talking to other people and they talk to you a little bit less because you're someone they already know and they more talk to new people. You feel like, oh, they don't like me as much. But wait, they're an opener. It's mainly what they do. And if you respect that properly, which most people don't, but when you see it, as I'm showing you now, right? And then you maintain your relationship with that person in a different way when you respect it and see the great value. And they might talk to you a little bit less than they did the first time they met you. And they might seem like they're more interested in other new people and other things and on to the next thing. But they're not really. They still totally value long-term relationships and people. It just might not be like as obvious. But if you nurture that end and you connect, especially then you have events that they can refer people to, now you're on the fat path to traffic. Again, there can also be connectors you can look for in a metaphorical sense. It's not a person, but like the online dating or Google. Have I taken advantage of Google as a connector? Again, I'm a multimillionaire. The traffic came from connectors and events. And that's why it's been easy for me. Even though I'm personally introverted, I'm personally not someone that just goes out and networks. I'm not really a networker, all that. But I realized to respect openers and connectors and take advantage of events. And I don't even have to hold the events often, but by just respecting the openers and connectors who make the event, then you can plug into it. But if I had to start from scratch, I would realize better to do events. And I almost certainly would. I just didn't know that before. So I relied more on connectors and openers. but events will get you very far and help you understand them better, help you connect with connectors better. Openers will like you and so forth. It gives you more ongoing value to them and so forth. Like anything, if it's new to you doing an event, then you'll start somewhere and you get better at it. I'll get to the mastery process that'll apply to that and everything else in a while. So there you go with your prospects and traffic. As you understand and apply what I just told you, then you're on the fat path. You need to be attentive and competent. I didn't give you every detail. I didn't tell you which event to go to or who the openers are, but you just now need to be competent and attentive, but you can be on the fat path to prospects and traffic. And then if you learn how to get people to make a decision, which is sales and conversion, which I've talked about in the past and I'll continue to talk about, and if you come up with a good product or product and service combined to get people a result, right? A good thing with product is a differential between how easy it is for you to do a service, just psychologically or talent-wise, and plus how much, and then what people perceive as valuable. And the more you can find a difference there, where you can get it cheap or make it cheap, or it's easy for you to do psychologically because it's your thing. And then if other people value it a lot, then the difference between those two, and I haven't said it in this way before, it's very valuable what I'm saying, for product, right? And then you combine a product and a service. If you think about it, you'll see what I'm saying. You have to apply it to actual real life and you'll see how you have both a service and a product. And that in pretty much every case, you have something that's like a product that you're selling and then there's a service that you're doing. And it doesn't have to be a physical product, right? But whatever it is. And then you combine those two together for a result for the someone wants. You put those three things together, figuring out sales, decision, conversion, that's one thing. Prospects, traffic, relationship, initiating relationship and maintaining and growing a relationship, that's traffic. And then putting a product and service together for a result where there's a differential as large as reasonably possible between what other people value and what you can produce or have a source for or do or enjoy doing or whatever. It might be there's nothing that you particularly enjoy doing that much, but how much you don't enjoy doing is smaller than how much people value it, right? So it's all work can be. That's all you can find. So there you go. Another example, fat path. I said reverse engineering from a buy. And what a buy means is, so you're thinking about how to make your business work. And so you imagine that someone buys into your product and service combined. They want the result. Think about how that happened. And think about how it might have happened reliably. So when you first think about it, you might think about the struggle, or you had to think about all these clever things to say in order to take someone from meeting them, from them being a prospect, to them making a decision to buy your product. And this might even give you insight of the product itself, the result itself. Just think about, okay, they bought the product and even think of them getting a result. So think of what's a result they would really value and that they would value ahead of time because they have to buy it before they get the result, right? So they have to perceive the value before they get the result, right? You don't want to sell a result that people can't see ahead of time or else they're not going to buy it, right? To get the. So you imagine someone perceiving value in buying, right? They hand you the money, they agree that they want the result, the product or service, right? That is going to get them the result. And then imagine how that might have happened in a reliable, easy, if you're attentive and competent way, from meeting the person to furthering the relationship and developing it enough where you can talk to them enough to get them to help them get to a decision, right? And if you think of it as a struggle, you're missing something about the process, right? You need to keep on working at it until you find, again, like reliable fat path, right? But the fat path looks reliable as long as you're competent and paying attention. Maybe you need to develop what it means to be competent and paying attention before you can see the fat path, right? But work at it, but you're looking for that fat path in life. You're always doing that. Life, it can't be a constant struggle. It shouldn't be. Okay, more examples. Reading, learning, chance of the NCAGT story. I've talked about this, so I'm just going to refer back to it. You're aware of some of these examples. Chance to read. It was easy and reliable, but easy had to be my wife and myself, particularly my wife, did most of the work, had to be attentive and competent, but didn't have to figure out very difficult things all the time. So suppose you're teaching a kid to read and they don't want to do it and they're 7 years old and they're interested in all kinds of other stuff, right? and they want to read. They don't want to read. They want to watch TV. They want to play games, and you have to struggle and fight with them to get them to do a little bit of reading. That's not what you want, right? Instead, we started early when they weren't going to have a lot of alternatives and when whatever their mom was interested in, right? When a child gets older, what their parents are interested in is not the end all be all to a child, presumably, right? I don't know everything about child development, but pretty obviously it becomes less and less important, right? They have their own interests, so to speak. When a child is like 2, then if their mommy is interested in and excited about something, they're all about it for the most part. So guess when a great time to teach them some basics in life is, right? So reading is special and language, right? And that's when we taught them reading, and just by having it around and telling them what words meant, right? With flashcards and so forth. But again, it was gonna work, right? It's not really a struggle. Like if you're excited about something around a 2-year-old, it's just not, they don't fight you. They fight you in their own way for sure, right? They throw tantrums, they're a pain in the butt in all kinds of ways. But it's like in the moment. But overall, if you're like that, like excited about something, they're going to be looking at it and learning it too. And so that's an example of a fat path that was reliable, just having books around, reading them, and also showing individual words with flashcards quickly. Kids they imprint very fast at that age. Also, it meant that Chance learned to read without sub-vocalizing for the most part. The really efficient way to read is where you sub-vocalize 20% or less of the words, which means you voice them not out loud so much, although some people do it a little bit out loud, but you with your throat, like a little bit, you read the words like in a way that you're talking to yourself in your head and then hearing yourself talk. It's more efficient if for 80% or so of the words that they're just sight words where you see them and think them without needing to translate them through like verbally in your head. And so when you teach a kid to read by them reading out loud all the time, then that's how they read. That's how they learn to sub-vocalize 100% of the words. And it keeps their reading rate artificially low. And so reading is like a struggle or whatever. But instead, the easy way is easy in every way. Like it's fine to say some new or keywords, like kind of not out loud so much, but in your head, like verbally. But for most of the words, you don't need to do that. It's not helpful, and it actually gets in the way of paying attention to some of the key words or new words or sounding out certain words. So once again, it's a fat path with reading, not only with Chance, but you can learn to do it when you're an adult. Although I can't refer to you a place that does it right now. I don't know. But I used to teach it. And so it's basically easier once you get doing that illusion of sub-vocalizing, that it's easier to read at a rate that's about 4 times faster. You comprehend a little bit better and so forth. Learning as a whole, it doesn't need to involve any kind of struggle. Let's see here. I have this note I'm trying to remember here about my notebook about people talk like about learning like practice makes perfect. Oh, this is more something when I was going to talk about mastery in a little while. But the trouble with that idea that practice makes perfect is that you're assuming you already know what's correct from the very beginning. Think about it, right? If you're practicing very early in the learning or potentially mastery process, then that assumes you already know the answer and you're just repeating it a lot, either physically or saying it or reading it, right? But the path that leads to mastery doesn't start by thinking you already know the answers. There's a lot with learning that I know that's fat path stuff, but I'll skip this NCAGT example that stands for North Carolina Association of Gifted and Talented Teachers. It's a government related thing with teachers down there. And they have a conference, and I got friendly with a very nice woman who's a teacher down there when I was doing my speed learning course, my accelerated learning course in my 20s. And I got invited to speak at their convention, but not when I was speaking, but then the keynote speaker it was like a 3-day convention. I think it was 2 or 3 days. I can't remember, but the last speaker on Sunday, there was breakout rooms most of the time, but then the featured speaker was a PhD, and she was talking about something, and she explained that, and everyone was there, like over 300 teachers who were like gifted and talented, the teachers of gifted and talented programs. And they were often like teacher of the year in their district, or they pretty much all had a master's in education, right? A lot of knowledge, supposedly, a lot of formal education about learning and teaching and education. So the woman who was speaking was a PhD. And she said that a friend of hers, a colleague, a PhD, that a PhD would never call someone that was not a PhD. Of course, they're all way beneath them. But anyhow, the woman speaking, she said that a colleague of hers got interested in why it was that, like, from the same class or even adults from the same like seminar or something, why some of them learned and some of them didn't. And so she got a grant and she did a whole study and came to a conclusion about what was the most important factor in whether why some students would learn from the same course and others wouldn't. And then she said, do you know what she found, to the audience? So I was sitting there in the audience and there's 300 teachers, and she told the story and she asked genuinely, she was like, do you know what she found? And she wanted people to answer, but nobody would answer. Everyone was scared, and the experts are, they don't want to say something wrong. Right. And so I waited to make sure that there's no one else who's going to give an answer. And then I gave an answer. Now, remember, the question was that a colleague of hers who was already a PhD when she initiated the study became interested in why some people learn from a particular course and succeed at it and some people don't. So that means that it's possible to get a PhD in education without knowing that, right? Because there's a PhD researching this question. Again, without knowing why some people learn and some people don't. Something that basic and critical, apparently you can literally be a PhD in education without knowing the answer. And so she got a grant, right? She got given money to do the study, and she did a study. And then this speaker, who knew this woman, was asking a room full of people with masters in education. A lot of them were teachers of the year in their little towns and so forth. And what the answer was. And they didn't know, presumably, or at least they were scared to hazard a guess or whatever. And so I finally, after several seconds, but no one was answering, in that setting, you raise your hand. And she said, and she called on me. And I said, it would be whether they like the teacher or not. And she said, that's exactly correct. And I did not learn that. I didn't read that somewhere. I just have a model, and I understand learning and meta concepts and strategy. And this was in my 20s, right? Like my mid 20s. And so PhDs didn't know this, at least originally, right? And the people in the room didn't know it. But by understanding learning in the way that I did, of course, this is critically important, right? Question. And so I already had a model that took it into account. Because when you look for the path that is going to be reliable and easy if you're paying attention, then if somebody likes the teacher, see, learning, the brain can do no problem. Just like a computer disk can like always have information written on it without a problem, right? Or a hard drive, right? Or whatever. It's not hard to write something on there. Your brain can simply learn. Everyone's brain can learn like easy. Nuts. You would just like everyone knows how to find their way home, and they know a bazillion things. Even people that are supposedly stupid or smart or whatever, people can learn. It's absolutely easy and effortless. It's like being able to eat. Think about it. Like literally learning is difficult or as easy as eating. Like it's just your brain just does it. It's just super easy. But there's a block, right? Like the other thing that's going on with your mind regarding learning is that it's taking in way more information than you're going to want to retrieve later, more than it's going to encode in the first place. But I'm not sure about it. It might encode all of it. Who knows? But the issue at least is with retrieval for sure. Because you don't want, like people with like supposedly photographic memories and so forth, or eidetic recall, they often have a problem in a lot of cases in life because one word or one question or something will spark so much information for them that it gets clogged up or it's too much for them to process, like consciously and so to speak. When I say process consciously, I'm just speaking a little bit colloquially, but just getting the idea that'll bring to mind is what I'm trying to say. So the issue isn't with being able to learn so much as being able, as your mind determining what it should learn. Right? A little bit like with eating, right? Like you can't eat all the food in the world, or if there's a big buffet, you can't eat all the food, right? Yet you can only eat so much, but it's not difficult to eat. Eating is super easy, right? It's just picking which food to eat, so to speak. It's maybe that may or may not be the perfect parallel, but when you go to eat, once you decide to eat something, then eating it itself is super easy. Now, the decision to learn something happens subconsciously. You can't just consciously decide to learn something. Of course, you can consciously decide that you want to learn something, and sometimes that gets hard. But fundamentally, your subconscious, your mind determines what is going to be associated or learned. in a particular situation. But once it decides that, it just gets learned. The learning is completely easy, 100% in essence. So it comes down to creating conditions for that. And once you have that model, then you understand learning in a different way, and you can much more create the conditions to learn a particular thing for yourself or for kids or whatever. So that meta idea about learning that I just explained to you, if you can make something feel important to your subconscious or get labeled, if this is the important thing here to associate, or this should be learned, then it's easy in essence after that. See, learning is all about creating the conditions that makes it something feel important to your mind. Which if you're not in a rush, by the way, you can get the questions first and create a situation where you feel it, right? It might be hard to create those conditions instantaneously, but it might take a little bit of time, maybe a couple of days till something feels particularly important. That's where repetition in and of itself isn't about learning. It just is one route that sometimes makes something feel important to your mind, and that's why it gets learned. But your mind doesn't need repetition at all to learn something. It's completely easy, like literally the easiest thing in the world for your brain to learn. Just a matter of it deciding what should be associated or learned. Here's another example. Number 4, I wrote here, happy and peaceful in one's own head alone. Oh, and with money. Here's what I mean by that. In order to be basically happy in life, let's just say here, or let's make it a simple example where let's just say that you putting aside winning overall, having the world be get rid of bad and having everyone be basically happy, right? Then if we just think about a person who's pretty happy, right? Like their life is basically just good pretty much every day. All right. I'm not saying that the overall goal or not. I'm just saying, let's suppose that it's certainly nothing wrong with getting there, right? And a lot of people are not there. So what makes the fat path to getting there, the illusion, the block, or the thing that people don't realize is it's very easy to get there if you can be able to, people, they will live their lives based around not being alone with their thoughts. They need a constant distraction from being alone with their thoughts. And then when they are, their mind will kind of replay events from the past with negative emotions or potential events in the future with fears and dread. And even if that doesn't happen all the time, it'll inevitably happen. If you imagine if you go to sleep and it's not like you have a nightmare the whole time you're asleep, but if you inevitably have nightmares every night or every few times that you sleep or even every couple of weeks that you sleep, then that's not very nice, right? So it's a little bit like that with people, like metaphorically with people in their own heads. Inevitably, people will start to feel bad, bored or dread or shame or guilt, right? Or they'll think about something that they feel like they should have done and they haven't done. And again, that's like shame or guilt, right? Dread, fear, stress, that they feel like they need to do something, but they don't know how to do it. And the clock is ticking. Any one of those or all of them, people will feel if they're alone, like with their own mind in most cases, right? Many or most or almost all cases of people. If that's the case, then people need to distract themselves nonstop. Mostly what's going to distract them is other people. And they're going to have a real hard time like ever planning, right? Because planning typically is going to happen sure, you can mastermind with people, but if you're not alone working on something to some degree, then you're not doing a lot of good planning. That's just part of the planning process and reflecting on yourself and so forth, right? So you're going to be needy with other people. You're going to have an unexamined head, like unexamined beliefs, which is going to make you relatively unattractive to people, even if for other reasons you're attractive, right? It's going to contribute that part of your mental life that you can't be alone with yourself. And if you have all kinds of issues, then that's going to make you less attractive, no matter how many other things are making you attractive. And some people might be attracted to you and want to be around you because also they're trying to escape from being alone with their own head. So they need you for that. Right. But that's when we start to buy a lot of stuff because we want things, an event to distract us. Right. So it's financially expensive. And then it's hard to make much money when you're that way because you can't do a lot of planning. You have to stay within your box, right? You can't really get outside your box very well if you can't be alone with your own thoughts. And every time you are alone, you're going to feel, again, anxious, stressed, fear, dread, guilt, shame, one of those things. Again, it doesn't have to be every second, but just reliably. Give yourself an hour alone, and at some point you'll start to feel that way, right? I'm not saying you, I'm just saying if that's the case. So if we imagine this, then life being happy is a constant struggle that you're going to lose, right? A lot. And you'll win a lot, so to speak, in the sense of you'll walk the tightrope a lot. You'll have experiences, times with people, watch some TV alone, play a game, whatever, where you feel good for a while, but looming, right? You're always having to run from or keep busy, right? Distracted. The fat path here to being happy, right? The wide path is, we could probably think about it and distinguish them, but it's almost like you could go between just giving up, right? Just feeling miserable sometimes or distracting yourself, right? It's kind of bouncing around between struggling and like someone who's dieting and struggling and then giving up on the diet and then going back to a diet, right? It's like that with people trying to be happy, right? They find distractions that make them happy, or they spend money, or they make some money, whatever, but then they spend it. And it really is weirdly going to go hand in hand with money because people are going to spend all their money dealing with this situation. When they do that, then that adds another stress and it's a whole cycle. And plus they need to make money, which means they have to prioritize what other people value, which means they can't prioritize their own self-examination, right? So it's a whole cycle. The fat path to being happy in life is blocked by this illusion and then the invisibility of understanding how to be happy and peaceful in your own head, or even that it's possible, because people don't quite realize they're doing this, right? They just experience that they feel, again, fear, dread about the future, guilt, shame about the past, or stress, anxiety about what's going on now, right? Or the near future, but imminent, and you're involved in all those things, or all 6 of those things. They'll just experience that. And they don't see it. They feel that it's going on, but they just think that's the only reality. They don't see that they don't imagine that it's possible. And just acknowledging or realizing the possibility of being happy if you're alone with your own thoughts, then you can seek that out and achieve it for sure. Certainly I can help you, right? I probably already have if a lot of you have been with me for a while. And I'm not the only one that can help you with that. But there you go. That's another example of the fat path versus the wide or struggling. Another quick example, dating and romantic relationships. I've talked about this, right? I've talked about status several times, where if you think that dating and then the subsequent relationship, either meeting people and then the subsequent relationships, is about that you earn somebody else by being awesome yourself, and that you earn the right to stay in the relationship, or that you deserve to be in the relationship and they should like you if your relative status to theirs is higher, which can also be accomplished by cutting them down or keeping their head from getting too big. Not like maybe cutting them down all the time, but if they get too big for their britches or too successful, you get nervous, that sort of thing. So for a lot of people, anything outside of that is invisible, right? They think that life is about that, in business relationships as well. That is, right? Instead, the fat paths relationship involves seeing through that illusion to where it's about what you create together, including that you don't need to create extra stuff that isn't a good intersection together. Just do stuff intersect where you're having a nice interaction, creating a nice time or a nice interaction or a nice thing of some sort, or event or child that you're raising that you both want to raise, that sort of thing. Making a household, whatever it might be, family. So where the intersection exists and you don't have to force it, and where it doesn't, then you attend to that. And then another thing, I guess this is inherent actually within any kind of fat path situation. The attentive is redundant in a sense. But at least reinforce it, that once you understand that a relationship is not about personal value or status in some general sense, but it's about the specific interaction between two people and what's created by that interaction, that waveform, intersection, or whatever, then you pretty much just need to be attentive like any fat path situation. Just need to be competent and attentive past that. You obviously don't assume that just because you value something that your partner does, just because you think something's important that they do, you want to be attentive to what they think is important, which what they say will intersect to some degree with what they actually feel like is important, but not perfectly probably. People both aren't aware of what really juices them, what's really important to them to some degree. And they want to withhold the truth to some degree, right? We don't want to say everything about what we want to anybody, typically, right? Maybe in some cases people think they do or they do. But of course, we need to predict that it's very possible that someone's not going to say everything about what they want and what they think they feel. They might feel shame, guilty, or like it's too much or whatever, right? So they'll both edit what they say and they won't be totally aware of what's important to them. So you need to pay attention to how they respond to things and just, again, just basically paying attention. And paying attention means not having your view, your vision occluded by bias, by just seeing through your own, what you think is the case all the time, right? You need to be looking for what's important to them. And as soon as you are attentive to that and the status thing is dissolved, the wrong type of status thing, and you're basically attentive to what's important to the person, how could a relationship fail? If there's the intersection in the first place, right? You have things that you can create together. It's like the easiest thing in the world to have your business and romantic relationships and friendship relationships themselves. Final example, and otherwise, without seeing to that, then it's always between giving up, right? Oh, do I dump this person? Do I get out of this relationship? But then you still have yourself, right? The next relationship ends up being similar, right? So do you give up on the relationship or do you struggle through it? Or do you find just the right thing to say? Or do you have this, you're always in an issue with your partner and then how do you get out of it, right? That's the struggle. The narrow path is navigating all the difficulties that have to do with not being attentive and not knowing what's important to them, and especially status, right? That's going to mess everything up. Thinking that you deserve to be in a relationship with someone because of how great you are in some general, objective, one size fits all way. And that's it. You just have to do that. Or that maybe it's about you do what they want and they do what you want, like all compromise and so forth. But once you see it in terms of creating intersections together that are good for both of you and not forcing it when they're not there, then again, it becomes pretty easy. Otherwise you're struggling or you're just giving up, and neither the struggle nor the giving up is going to get you where you want to go, right? You have to find the path and then just be attentive after that, as always. This is pretty cool. I'm turning my attention in my life now more towards health and weight, right? And so forth, just because I always had it on my agenda. It just wasn't a priority on purpose. I felt like if I just maintained my health reasonably as far as I knew how, which wasn't very much, right? There's so much misinformation out there and myths, and took care of some other things first, like getting happily married and having that work out and then earning money and so forth. And I stand by those priorities for myself. I'm glad about them. But now that those are pretty much under control, then I'm turning my attention to a little bit more with health and diet. I'm not preaching at you. I don't think that I know better than anyone, but I am talking as always about the meta concept of the path. I came across this book that is I think it's very likely that it reveals the fat path for diet, at least like being thin and lean. And it's called Eat Bacon, Don't Jog. Pretty good. You can check it out and see if you agree, follow it and see how that works out for you. But I'm doing that now. I'm not going to get into it. You can just take a look at what he says. I guess I'll say the main thing he starts with is talking about insulin and glucose and how your body, the minute you give it any kind of carbs, it makes insulin, which inhibits burning of fat, and then it burns sugar out of your bloodstream. And then that contributes also to making you hungry, and you get on a whole downward spiral with feeling hungry, wanting more carbs, and not burning fat, storing it. And therefore, if you eat, you want to eat protein, but there's a limit. At some point, your body will turn protein into sugar, actually. And so you eat like almost all fat and then some protein and nutrients and so forth. It's not some crazy diet of weirdness. It's just like generally that, based on that principle, that is mostly invisible, right? Most things don't talk specifically like that and flows from there. It's not like in reaction to something, and it doesn't involve struggling. It involves a pretty easy path, but not a magic pill, not done for you. You have to be attentive. It generally has the qualities that you'd expect from a fat path. Again, the reveal of an illusion, not a magic pill, not done for you. You have to be competent and attentive, but you don't have to struggle, because once you aren't really eating carbs, you're not getting that sugar and that insulin for the most part, where you have like very low on carbs at least, then you actually don't feel hungry. You're burning fat, but you don't feel very hungry overall. And then you hit an upward spiral where you just have to be, as I say, like attentive. So it has all the characteristics of that. Scientifically, it's just a question of what's true, right? So I can't guarantee it, but at least with the characteristics, then you look into it, right? At least I'm saying in general, I'm not saying you have to go look into this book, but you look at something has the characteristics of a fat path, you look into it and you'll see. All right, let's see here. I know we've been going for a bit of a while, but I will cover this here. Okay. The meta process of mastery, my next and final slide what do we do overall? We remove failure conditions. Excuse me. We want to understand the mastery process. We want to use the mastery process, it's basically parallel to the fat path process. So it gives different angles in the same thing. And we want to master the seeking out and finding of the fat path for whatever you're trying to do in life. Make money, rank a website, be happy overall, take care of money, which is different than making money, take care of your financial situation, your romantic situation, business relationships, finding traffic, specific bite-sized pieces of making money, right? Wherever you're, like the subtopic is that you want to handle and you want to find the fat path, as I talked about with my first example, right? With traffic and connectors and events. So we want to master the fat path process, right? The finding of the fat path in life for things. To do that, let's take a look at the mastery process overall, which is something I've wanted to point out to you. And I've talked about before, but I want to be specific with you here, pointing out the mastery process. And then, as always, we want to apply the basic ideas like removing failure conditions to the mastery process. Why don't people master things? Because they empirically don't master things in general. When you apply the mastery process, you'll predictably be 1 out of 100, at least top 10%, typically 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of 10,000 in that endeavor. You're not trying to be better than other people. It's just, I'm saying it'll just be the case in most of the time. And that's evidence that people, of course, aren't aware in a meta way about the mastery process. They'll certainly stumble across it with particular topics sometimes, but then it won't be applied universally in their lives or even to most of their lives. So you want to be aware of the mastery process. 3 parts of it. There's a foothold. There's something that gets you open about a topic or with a person. If you're mastering a relationship with one particular person, then there's something that sparks that relationship, right? Some kind of foothold that you have with meeting the person. Or you notice that something's wrong with your meta process with relationships. So I'm giving a different example in the same genre, but in this case, I'm not talking about mastering a relationship with one particular person, but instead mastering being good at relationships. Then you might notice an anomaly like I eventually did with status, right? That gave me a seed, right? A wrongness. Something is revealed, right? Like as I say, with the fat path, something's revealed. So you get started. In the next slide, I'll talk about what blocks people from each of these 3 points. The second part of the mastery process involves your framework, right? And like breakthroughs. And what you're doing is this is like a question. When I get to the next slide, a lot will further make sense here. But the second part is so you start with a seed and then you can just picture a tree, right? I think God gives us lots of metaphors for important things. And a tree is a great metaphor for the mastery process. Starts with a seed and then it builds a tree and branches, which is like the framework. And then last come the leaves. If you want to have leaves in the air or leaves in the first place, then you plant a seed. You don't just try to put leaves in the air, right? And then that you go through the framework part. And then finally you get the details, assimilate, consolidating after a breakthrough. A breakthrough might mean that you find a question, the right question to ask, for example, or realize something that you didn't realize, whatever. But it basically builds your framework. And then integration. Another example of framework is in part of your mind, you decide, oh, I realize this. I want to think this way. I want this belief, or I want to have this habit. When you because first you might realize that there's something you want to improve in your life. That's like a seed. All right. Then you realize, oh, here's the habit that's going to do that. Here's the way of operating. So intellectually or with part of your mind, you want that habit, such as with the diet, right? I realize, oh, wait a second. My weight is going above where I want it to be, even if I'm a little chubby and the weight stopped for 10 years, but then it starts to climb again a little bit. Ooh. All right. That's an anomaly, right? It's a wrongness, something at the seed, right? Foothold. Then framework, breakthrough, question. Maybe we could just, depending on the nuance that we meant, we could put reveal down in number 2 if we want. Just like a reveal of an anomaly or a foothold, like one little thing that gets you started. But then you don't have to get obsessed with what exactly do I mean by a foothold. It's anything in this general area will give you a sense of the mastery process. The main thing you want to do is not block it, because then you don't really have to find where does the seed end and where does the trunk begin. right? Or when there's a sprout coming out of a seed, at the part where the sprout looks like it's close to the seed, what part of the seed, what part of the sprout, that doesn't matter, does it? You understand there's a seed, then the trunk and the branches. This book, for example, Eat Bacon, Don't Jog, it can provide a framework, right? I read it and part of my mind is, okay, I'm understanding what I'm reading, right? I'm getting it. But that's not enough, right? I need to then integrate it to the rest of my brain, right? So we don't want to stop at framework, or it's easy to stop at a breakthrough or a framework or feeling of a framework and get a false feeling of closure, as I'll show you on the next slide. We want to then integrate, assimilate details or integrate in the rest of our mind. And also, you don't need to get frustrated or feel like something's wrong when you have a framework, but you don't have the details yet. You might think, oh man, I thought I had it. The two it, you have the it for the framework. That doesn't mean you have the it for number 3. You need to distinguish 2 and 3. And you can have 2. You can have the breakthrough. You can have the book that explains it all. You can have the right question without yet having the answer. So seeing the difference between 2 and 3 is important, and you value both of them. But you don't mistake one for the other. So let me go to this bottom slide here. And consolidation I wrote after the breakthrough. Just like an army, if it takes over a new territory, then it needs to dig in and defend it so it doesn't get taken back, right? Okay, so what blocks the mastery path? First, the mastery process itself is invisible to people. You might think, oh, no, everyone knows that mastery process. Just look at how people actually act and think, and you'll see that they don't. 1, 2, and 3, I said, are basically conflated. Let me continue here for a second. Number 1, so it's typically, number 1 is like that seed, that anomaly. When people encounter anomalies, what do they normally do? By default, what people do is like the wide path, right? Is they delete, they marginalize. Oh, it's no big deal. I justify it. Oh, my weight's just increasing a little bit. No big deal, right? That's just, how things are, right? Whatever it is, or someone sees what could be an anomaly with their own thinking, or teenagers rebel. Oh, that's what they do. That's normal, right? They go crazy. Maybe they don't have to go that crazy. Maybe if we don't teach them to get addicted to authority, they wouldn't need to reject authority so strongly, that idea. And then all the ripple effects from that. So when there's an anomaly or a wrongness, that can be a seed, that can be a foothold for us to discover, to master a whole new thing that can be relevant, that can be helpful for us. You don't have to master everything in life, right? But it helps to master things that are going to be important. When you master something, what would have been a narrow path becomes a fat path. Things that would be difficult for a non-master are easy for you. So if there's something you're struggling with in life, then it must be important enough that you're struggling. And it may be that if you master it instead, then, which ends up being synonymous in practice with finding the fat path, because part of the fat path is you create it, you pave the way, you clear it out. So there could be a narrow twisting path, but you widen it or parts of, you might reveal something to start with, but then it still might otherwise be narrow and difficult until you achieve mastery. But then it becomes easy. And so all you had to do was achieve mastery, and that was your fat path. The fat path was there all along. You needed to reveal something and then master what would be a narrow, difficult path if you didn't master it. Like a person who's a master carpenter or a master chef, it's easy for them. They have to pay attention, but it's easy to cook a great meal or to build something cool with carpentry, right? For me, it wouldn't be, because I'm not a master of those two things, right? So they found something and they mastered it. So they had to pay attention, but it became easy. Mastery might be as simple as you read this book that I showed you, and you just you put it into practice, and then it becomes simple for you, right? So mastery doesn't have to be thousands of hours learning carpentry. Sometimes it might be with certain topics, certain things in life, and then you choose if that's worth it for you in your situation. But mastery does not need to be arduous or difficult. Again, it just depends. But it's the fat path to things often does involve or maybe always, depends on how we understand it, involves some sort of mastery process. So the first thing is people would have what would be a seed, but it falls on like shallow ground, right? It's deleted or marginalized, doesn't take root. Another thing that messes with the mastery process is that when someone gets a framework, they feel closure because they're in a rush, right? Overall, another thing that's blocking this, which I think is on here, is in the second paragraph here. I said the alternative model, with the way people normally, where they don't actually master things, it occludes, it gets in the way, right? It gets in the way of us seeing the real mastery process. The alternative model, the way people usually act, because what happens is answers and fast results are praised, right? If somebody is pitching a make money product to you, aren't you impressed with fast results and answers? I'm going to show you exactly what to do. It's fast. And look what I did. I did it real fast. Here's my results, right? So we're drawn to that. In school, open-ended questions are not respected. You're praised and rewarded for answers. And the faster you do the answers, the smarter you're said to be, right? So again, that's part of the heroin that people get addicted to, metaphorically speaking, in school. Happens outside of school too, if it happens, but it definitely happens in school. Just like someone could take bad drugs other than heroin, but you still don't give them heroin, right? Bad things can happen outside of school, but you still don't want to send your kids to school because that's definitely bad. Anyhow, so when you praise someone for answers and especially fast answers, and that's mostly what you reinforce and reward and praise, and the nearness, right? What is our mind based on, run off of by default is nearness. And so obviously just in normal life, outside of any artificial stuff, what's nearest to the reward, like the details, the final thing that you do, right? The answer. So the result, the final result. So the leaves of the tree, right? So it looks like you want that and fast. And of course you get it with the mastery process, but with the fat path, once you get on the fat path, including clearing it out, so it becomes a fat path, you get it, you reveal it and or pave it, right? Or some combination of those. Once you're there, you're all set. But by default, what people's minds associate as good, again, the answer, the result. And then we also get fake answers are often reinforced, right? The teacher tells you what's good. They tell you the answer to start with, not the question, just the answer. And so you literally start at part 3 of the mastery process, and then you repeat it back and you're praised. There's no mastery. And so that seems right to people. They just want to be told, number 3, do it, follow instructions, right? Follow the make money program where you just follow instructions and it's done for you, right? People want to start at 3 because they get put in life through a lot of situations that mimic or fake, falsely make them feel like they did start at 3 and they got rewarded for it. But you can't ever actually start at 3, right? You can't start with leaves. You have to start with a seed. But you could fake it, right? You could just get a bunch of leaves and hand it to somebody and then pat them on the head, right? Metaphorically speaking, that happens so often in our lives that we think that's why plant trees? You just have someone hand you leaves and then pat you on the head. Open questions are ridiculed or felt to be mostly bad, right? If you just ask questions but don't have answers in school or in a lot of places in life, people don't like that very much. If I did a webinar and I asked a bunch of questions, you wouldn't like that much. Or maybe you would. You guys are pretty awesome. But already being right is so important, right? You ever, depends on your culture and so forth and religion, but someone might be in a Christian church and they might be talking. Maybe their pastor telling a story or maybe someone sharing or whatever. Or it might be an informal setting in a group and they'll be talking about how they used to be bad and then they repent and then change, right? And their story, it's supposed to be humble because they're talking about how they were bad. But no ever, if you were to bring up how they're bad right now, oh, that's absolutely out of bounds, right? They wouldn't admit it typically. Now their story wouldn't be like, I have a fault now. Something's wrong with me right now and I haven't fixed it yet. That wouldn't make for a good sermon or story, right? All the stories are, oh, I did this bad thing. I was on drugs. I did this thing in my youth. I did that. And they're like, I've been there. I did it. And then I overcame it. It's always about overcoming it. And it's always, right? So you can never have questions now or not be perfect now or not be, at least everyone gives lip service to not being perfect, but there can't be anything specific about not being perfect, right? That's critical. That's no good. So we're always supposed to be at number 3, right? We're always supposed to have already be good, already got it. And so if that's the case, then we need a cheap substitute in order to achieve that. If the only real mastery comes from going through the stages 1, 2, and 3. But why aren't people realizing it is because they have a cheap substitute, which is basically instead of a framework, because it's so rewarded and valuable and because you're so ridiculed for not already being great, or you feel ashamed or guilty, right? Then what do? We want to, or if you're learning something new, someone explains something, they give you a lecture or like not a lecture like a one-on-one, but like a webinar, right? And they're teaching something. Don't you feel like you're better if you understood it? If you got to number 3, right then and there, we feel good. We feel like, oh, I'm smart. I got it. Or we like the guy that shared it or the girl, right? The woman. We like them better if we feel like we got to number 3 just right on that talk, that lesson. And if we don't, we feel agitated, like something's wrong. Or we blame them or we blame ourselves, depending, right? But we don't like it. Something's wrong. That doesn't happen if you get on the fat path with the mastery process, where you understand and assimilate. You don't just have the framework of the mastery process, which I'm giving you potentially now. All you should look to get from me always, or any teacher, is number 2. Get to number 2. And you can replay their stuff, review it, and get to number 3 and put it into practice. But you can't get to number 3 ever by just listening to someone. When you think you do, it's because you already had number 2. Or you're wrong. And what often happens, and what keeps people blind to this whole process, hear me now, is that your mind will import an analogous framework. What's an analogy? It's similar, but different, not the same thing. So your mind, because it doesn't know the real framework for the new thing you're learning, it can import an associated framework, something from your past, something else that you know, or something that you think is the exact same thing. Oh yeah, I know what you're saying. You ever hear what someone's saying and you think you knew what they're talking about, but you didn't project it, right? What people say, right? They say projecting, but it's like importing really a framework because you're in a rush, right? Because you want to already be smart. You want to get closure now on the webinar. You want to get through number 3 right now, the number 3 step. When you embrace the fact that you always want to have an original framework. And David, but what if you already have the framework? If you already have the framework, then you still want to understand what framework is being explained or is appropriate for the situation in order to know whether you have the right framework already or not, right? If something that you learned in the past is exactly applicable to this situation, how could you possibly know that unless you can match it to the currently relevant framework? And how could you do that unless with a fresh mind, you pay attention and you seek out the framework for this situation? So you might already have the exact match framework in your mind, but you can't know that unless you can match it to the one that's applicable right now, that the person's talking about, or that maybe there's no person teaching you, but you're doing a situation, right? Now, one way you can find out if you have the right framework in a situation, especially if you have if you're talking to a person or if you're alone doing something, is you can import a framework stipulating that it might not be the right framework and just see if it fits. And that helps you to, now just because something fits doesn't mean that it was exactly right, but at least it fits, and that gives you some feedback and gets you on your way, right? And then you can have some questions from there perhaps. So what you want to do is embrace understanding the framework for what's at hand. Even if you already had it, you still you can't know that unless you are listening with a certain type of freshness to the new situation. You get the framework, you get the questions that are being addressed, or you don't get it and you just have a seed and you need to build the framework. And then again, you embrace that you need to seek out and build the framework, which involves basically asking questions. And sometimes you'll have breakthroughs that can lead to more questions too, right? And building up questions is building up your framework. Revealing certain things that you hadn't seen before. Certain type of revealing can start to, again, if by reveal you mean anomaly or wrongness or seed, then that's one. If part of a framework breakthrough question is revealed, then that's more like number 2. You can almost put reveal in either one of these. When you embrace this framework step and see it as distinct from 1 and 2, I think everything else fits into place. Because now you're not afraid of number 1. You don't need to delete or marginalize anomalies. You're excited because when you've experienced mastery properly, Seeds are great because you don't see a seed as, oh, damn it, now I'm going to find out that I don't have life all figured out. You already know that if things aren't perfect, right? And so you want seeds instead of being scared of them. You want anomalies instead of being scared. It's if you're a detective and you've used anomalies to successfully solve several cases, right? That clue that didn't fit. And that led to breakthroughs that led to answers. You do that a few times, and now you embrace anomalies instead of run from them or delete or marginalize them like by default. So the mastery process, you're on the fat path to the mastery process. You're on the mastery process to the fat path, right? It's all kind of one, right? It all goes together. The mastery process, the fat path, the Ragnarok idea of removing failure conditions until you win. But I think by seeing this mastery process, seeing what blocks it, why people don't do it, right? I wrote people skip to number 3 by importing an old wineskin in quotes. That's what I'm saying. You're importing an old framework that was applicable to some other situation, perhaps. Maybe it's applicable to the situation, maybe it isn't. If you import it and force it, you'll never know whether it was the right thing really or not. And the habit of doing so will consistently keep you from building a fresh framework. And because the whole process is pretty futile, if you're going to skip to number 3, then you'll mostly ignore number 1 anyway. You embrace and understand the process, it becomes exciting in the way that you live life, and then you seek out foothold, seeds, anomalies, wrongness. When they're important, you don't try to master all kinds of crap just to prove that you can. So you don't master in order to prove something. You master because it has impact, because it's something that's genuinely important, not just because it's close. And you never want to do something just to make yourself feel better about yourself. You're building, you want to do things that are going to matter, right, for real. And then it all feeds on itself. You're on an upward spiral with the mastery process, the fat path, etc. Awesome. Let's take a minute break here, and then we'll do a little bit of discussion, and then we will. I'll be right back. Put the OMG way on here, and reply. Fat and flurry. Catchy as hell. That's great. Okay, I will be back in a minute. I am back. Okay, we live up to the hype here. The fat path is lined with bacon. I love that. It's great, Mike. I might read through a bunch of these comments and then come back so I don't skip them. Another thing, let me point out in general with the stuff that I cover. Often you might have questions, right? What did David mean by this? Wait, could you explain that more? One thing you could do is on your own, figure out what's correct. Instead of trying to figure out what I meant, just try to figure out what's correct. It's a subtle difference, but I think people can make this mistake sometimes. They're like, what did you mean by this? Instead, just try to figure out what's correct about it. And you can, of course, it doesn't really matter about me, right? If I meant that, great. But if you figure out what's correct, then you figure out what's correct and you're all set. You don't have to depend that way on me being correct. And also you don't have to depend on finding out what I mean by something. Instead, you can just figure out the correct answer and then hope that I meant. If it seems pretty clear over time that I didn't mean that, then you can try to enlighten me, write to Mike or something, mention something on a webinar. That I don't have anything specific in mind that someone said or asked when I said that. It just occurred to me. Made it. Julie says, I want to not be in a rush with money and I want that right away. So true. So funny. Yeah, exactly. Right. The not being in a rush thing. It's very powerful. I think once you see this fat path and mastery process, when you see the right way, then hopefully the wrong way will fall away. Right. And you'll have an alternative to being in a rush. I think it's hard to drop being in a rush because you don't have a good alternative. But I think with this Ragnarok series, you should have a good alternative to being in a rush. And remember, if you're currently in a rush, it's okay, right? You just seek a way out using the same process as always. And you don't have to worry, wait, do I use the fat path? Do I use the mastery process? They boil down to the same thing. Or do I use the Ragnarok idea? Just by giving you different angles, you have different angles to attack any problem, right? Or any topic that you're trying to master. If you use the mastery process, you'll automatically be looking for the fat path. If you look for the fat path, you'll automatically be helping yourself through the mastery process. And you'll automatically be applying the core idea of removing failure conditions until you win. They're all logically related. Whoa. I pre-typed this question because I'll still be at work for the first hour of this webby, removing failure conditions. It is a pretty long example. I'll take a look at that. It's very exhausting. Sorry, let me see. My job as a chiropractor, I've been exhausted since graduating 12 years ago as a chiropractor. Over the past year, I've been looking into info on being an introvert and info recently on being a highly sensitive person. not necessarily emotionally sensitive, but of being hyper aware and responsive to things going around me. Even though I love helping people feel better, it's still very exhausting. Even though I don't work a lot of hours, maybe 30 to 35 a week, by the time I get to weekends, I'm exhausted. I'll need almost a day of doing nothing. Oh, one sec. You think there? If you're on the audio MP3 recording, listening to this, wondering what that was. Okay. This doesn't necessarily help to crush it with prospecting for client SEO. When I get pumped up and motivated, I try to work a lot of extra hours on SEO, but I get worn out and sick pretty quickly. Any advice on try to balance things? Hope it doesn't come across as whining. It doesn't come across as whining at all. Just been thinking about what you've taught. And I think this is one of the biggest failure conditions to me being happy in the long term. I've been to a lot of the success gurus in the profession trying to get myself, quote unquote, on purpose. Yeah, I don't talk about that, right? For good reason. I haven't been able to solve getting exhausted by the job. What I would do, I said I would read a bunch of these, but I just read this and I'm responding, but hey, go with the flow for a second here. What I would do is try to look for ways to cut down on your spending. Right. So what I try to do is I try to like declutter. Often I look in the context, right, of things. And I'm not saying you spend a lot of money, but if you spend even less, and pretty much everyone could spend way less, right, than they do. Most of what we do is out of habit or because we feel like people expect it of us and so forth. So I would cut down on my spending and then I would cut down on my hours of being a chiropractor. If that's not possible, then I don't see how that would be possible. Oh, if you can't cut down on hours, then you could also cut down on spending, no matter what it takes, cut down because you want to get out of this, right? Once you realize you have to get out, then you have to find a way out. What I'm saying might not be the best way out, but it's an example of what might be. This is what I would try, like for first. And then I would try to get myself 6 months to a year's cushion of money, both by reducing my spending and then, which would presumably would mean I accumulate some. So may or may, either I would cut down on my hours and see how that works and spending and see if I can just get in a pattern of, can I work 20 hours and that covers my expenses? And then does that allow me to build something with like OMG type of money, right? Like with client or whatever, SEO. Try that. If the other thing you can do as opposed to cutting back in a consistent way is you could not cut back or you could even work extra, get more exhausted, but give yourself a 6 month to a year window. The clock is ticking, but if you have a 6 month or a year window, that might be enough where you don't feel like the clock is ticking at least for 5 months or so. And if you can get back into it now, that might lead to losing a bunch of clients and regular clients. Still, you need a way out. So one of those two, I'll pretty much look to do. And when I think about it, it's pretty hard to find a way to do it without cutting back on spending. Probably easier, like in a sense, than any other way of decluttering, right? Or yeah, and then just go from there. It's also possible that there's a different way to make money for some amount of time that doesn't exhaust you, that isn't like entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurial, OMG is a pretty great way to go. I wouldn't necessarily try something different. But in terms of a job that pays your bills, I know chiropractor is likely the way to do it, but it's possible that something else, there's some other job that you could just apply for that even if it takes a number of hours, it doesn't leave you so exhausted. And you can always go back to any of this, right? But try something for a couple of years, right? Like that. It might even not take a couple of years, right? It might take 6 months or less of giving yourself enough mental, physical energy for OMG. Another thing, this eat bacon, don't jog thing, read that. You might want to check out that book. And it might be that just physically your diet and exercise, there might be an easy way to have more energy by, I know this might sound either cliche or odd, but maybe cutting back drastically on carbs. I mean, that much I figured out even before these webinars, right? On a day, I told you before, on a day I don't do webinars separate from much health knowledge or anything. I just observe that if I eat carbs, I'll be on a crash by the time the webinar comes, relatively speaking. So it might be that a simple change in your diet might get you on a gravy train with energy and not being that hungry. And that leaves you with more energy. I identify with what you say about the thing with being a chiropractor, being around other people. It tends to drain me of energy too. As far as I know, I'm just saying experientially, maybe there's something I'm missing, but I experience the same of being introverted where I get recharged being by myself. Some other people get recharged by being with other people and they feel more drained being alone. It seems like a real thing between being introverted and extroverted, as far as I can tell. but there might be a whole new other way of looking at it that I don't know of. Matt wrote, got stuck in traffic and joined a bit late. Glad I was able to catch the fat path concept because I was a bit confused about the hashtags when I logged in. Am I telling everyone to get fat here? Desmond says, happy to be here. Grateful to be able to make this webby live. Hello, gang. Drop it like it's hot. Let's see. Desmond said the government needs to be made obsolete. Non-contradictory thinking helps to achieve this. And so does Bitcoin. All right. Incidentally, David, some of the earliest innovators of Bitcoin had a history of Magic the Gathering. I thought you and Mike might appreciate that little fact. Excellent. The reason I don't really pay attention to Bitcoin much is because other people are inventing it and doing it. Like for normal people, it's more of just like an investment, which just means gambling opportunity, right? Which I'm not saying don't buy it. I'm just saying that gambling for me is not the route to success, but more power to the people that have invented the technology and so forth. Megan said, this is amazing that you can draw the distinction so clearly between taking the revealed path to the win rather than the normal exhausting alternatives of fight versus giving up. Wow. Clear and applicable. Excellent, Megan. Yeah, I really was excited about this webinar. I thought that it would, again, be clear and applicable to people. Julie says, so grateful that I had already been exposed to data before deciding to home educate my son. To begin with, I had let go of the idea of reproducing much of the stuff subject-wise they do in school because here in Australia, you have to produce a plan that's based on the syllabus, which I already knew I didn't. Once I let go of the narrow path, he started to come on in leaps and bounds. Oh, wow. It's fascinating to watch. So almost nobody gets it and they put on pressure for us to do school at home. Great. I'm still learning, of course, but there's a way in which it is effortless now. It's amazing. That's wonderful, Julie. So you experienced exactly the fat path once you let go of struggling. And when I say let go of struggling, I don't mean don't struggle. Just if you're in a rush, I don't say stop rushing that minute. But what you do is you also observe it. A little bit like people talk about this sometimes with eating or with spending money. You might not be able to budget immediately, but if you spend a month watching or writing down how you spend money, then that tends to be eye-opening and help people. Same thing with eating. If you just were to write down or to watch what you eat, then just observing it, that it gives you a different additional perspective. So same thing with if you're struggling or fighting with a child or fighting in whatever thing to get clients or with a client or to rank websites, then you don't have to stop struggling in the moment, but you start to observe it and also create a space for finding a way out, finding the fat path additionally. But as always, you don't rush being on the fat path, and you'll get this more and more. The more you master the meta mastery process, the more you master the fat path process, the more you get on the fat path with mastery or with the fat path process, the more it feeds on itself. The more you understand how to understand, then it puts your whole life on a fat path. I also had plenty of examples from games, but you wouldn't identify with them as readily. But I spent enough time talking about my slides, so I didn't get to those. But I've duplicated this so many times with the fat path versus the default path or the struggling fighting path. And when you see this, then you also see success memes and stuff in a different light, right? Most success memes talk about memes, like little things that people share on Facebook and stuff, or successories posters or whatever. They're usually about struggling rather than the wide path, right? And giving up. Fighting. And again, I'm not saying don't fight. That's overly simplistic interpretation of what I'm saying. I'm saying that, again, look for and then ultimately find a path to not fighting. You do that by having what I am saying is have a space, a mental space or whatever, in which you look for a way out of the whole paradigm that you're in if you're fighting. You may also have to fight and struggle realistically, but also open a space to look for a way out via the fat path, not through giving up. Susanna says, I have 2 teenage kids and you're so right about this, David. The kids have to fit into a box at school and are taught that they have to obey authority. Yeah. And they're like, it's reinforced. Matt says that is so accurate. It is unfortunate that schools truly do teach and value reward obedience over healthy skepticism. Yeah, exactly. Because again, it's the wide path. That's the wide, right? The obedience path, the easy path that leads to destruction. So at a family gathering and missing this will have unhappy face. We'll have to catch the replay. But the replay is happening just fine. We're recording. I always have a moment of deep dip where I feel like, oh, did I record it? And then but I pretty much always have. So Matt says, your point is very valid, David. Being right as a parent should be because you are correct or accurate, not merely to control your children, demanding that they obey without proper justification or explanation. When I was a child, I did the rough math around Santa delivering gifts to every household in a single night. I remember walking her through the basic math of the number of seconds in a year, and question the speed at which Santa would have to travel to deliver the present to thousands. Sounds like you were a gifted kid. I claimed that it was impossible. In fairness to my mother, she took the opportunity not to placate me, and instead she was honest. That was a turning point in my childhood, although that did not go over well with other children at school because I was pulling back the proverbial excellence. But you had that. It seems like that experience shaped your paradigm in a good way. It's terrific. David says the power of solitude. Yeah, exactly. Not as your only thing in life, but you need to like once you're able to be happy in your own mind, right? Then it doesn't mean that you sit there meditating on a mountaintop or in your room and don't get out. It just means that you're no longer doing stuff in reaction, like to compensate for that, right? You still do plenty of activities and so forth, but it's in a different way. And then you do activities because you inherently enjoy them, not because you need to do something. And then you're more attractive to other people as a personality, right? Type as a core personality, which makes your relationships better, which makes you happier, is a better example for them. And it's a whole upward spiral. Tim Dunn says, I've arrived late, but I have arrived. Bryce says, who does this art? Mike got the last two posters. I think he might have gotten them from his secret source. Have you revealed your secret source? I don't know if Mike can be on here. I know he had a major business meeting or interview, but you could, if you're here, Mike, you can tell me if you revealed your source. By the way, going back to that school stuff, I had to go through that, and being on par as my peers was not the worst part of school, or was the worst part. Got it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Exactly. Right. It's one of the bad things. There's a lot of bad stuff in school. And I say that not as a conspiracy, nothing like that. There's no conspiracy to make it bad. It's just the wide path. It's just the easy, obvious thing that seems right just isn't helpful. Basically, one way to look at another way to look at learning growing up, and really always in a certain way, learning is like apprenticeship. And so you can always look at who you're hanging out with that you're learning from, and just like you're apprenticing with that. You're like apprenticing with your peers, you're apprentice like in school or anywhere. But if you look at school, it's like you're apprenticing with your peers and with a government bureau, essentially. Or in a private school, someone who's basically having the bar set by a government bureaucrat and then just trying to do a little bit better. But private schools are just structured way too much like public schools for me to, in most cases. If one was super great, and of course such a thing could exist, then that would be nice. I'm not saying they don't exist. I don't know. Yeah. He talks about getting it from, can't remember the thing there. Maybe some kind of nut instead of, like bananas apparently have a bunch of carbs. Do we have time to ask questions today? Yeah, probably right now. That was 45 minutes ago. So there's a question 44 minutes ago. Love the science behind that, David. We'll look up that book. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Seems like it's dead on, but of course, when it comes to diet, I don't want to become all of a sudden the master just because of this. The Atkins diet is one of the things he lists as the type of thing that pretty much fit in with this. It's probably a little bit protein centric compared to what this guy probably would recommend, a bit more fat than the Atkins diet. But he points out how there's a myth perpetuated by anti-Atkins people that Atkins died like violating their fat, but he just got in a physical accident. And that was his death, and even weight gain was fully related to that. The Fat Path to Health would be a great book. That's terrific. I love it. Oh man, the Fat Path to Health. Oh, that's great. Bryce says, this may have nothing to do with tonight. I was a way to start a question. But I've been wanting to get this off my chest. In society and culture, I've been told that success is considered when one has physique, talent, skills, wealth, social backing, etc. Even though these are widely considered to be important, these types of things have been pressuring me. I don't think I should ignore these goals. However, I need to think of these things in a different way that does not become toxic. Okay, that's actually, I think that's an easy question for me to answer. What you want is for any goals regarding your physique, your talents, your wealth, your social situation, they should be revealed and not in reaction. They shouldn't be imposed on you either by trying to escape your own mind, or even if it looks like you're thinking for yourself. Like the first thing people do when they think they're thinking for themselves is they might be thinking for themselves in the moment, but their thoughts are coming. It'd be like my illustration of a president of a country, corporation, and advisors. And if the advisors set the frame by what they tell the president is going on and what their decisions are, And then the president then goes into another room and thinks, but within the frame that the advisors set, based on all their assumptions, that he might be in a room by himself, supposedly thinking by himself. But if he's still, the frame is set by the advisors, or of course, the parallel is that if you're thinking by yourself, but the frame is set by culture and your beliefs that you got installed when you're growing up. And even if you rejected those beliefs, but your epistemology is never got overhauled, your basic way of discerning truth, people often think they're rejecting what their parents taught, right? A whole lot of leftists are just people that were raised by conservative parents that just didn't like them very much, right? They didn't like the bad aspects of conservatism, so they go and they take what they think is the alternative, which is leftism, right? Which is basically just being a useful idiot for tyrants, right? Every idea in leftism and liberalism, by some strange coincidence, ends up with more money and power for the elite, who are defined as politically the leaders of the leftist movement, of liberal leaders. So you get a little suspicious after a while. If you look, somehow global warming means that Al Gore needs to have $100 million for doing nothing. It's a little strange. And when it's an overall pattern that's nonstop, then it becomes a little odd. And then demonizing people that do business is a little gratuitous, right? Yeah, all the evil in the world comes from entrepreneurs and corporations. It's a little ridiculous, right? It's not that they're saints, but it's a little bizarre that they're the ones that are greedy and not either criminals or politicians that are just pocketing money that's extorted. So I was saying that you don't want to react, like you don't want your ideas to just come from rejecting your ideas either. You want a reveal, rejecting one thing and taking what seems like the opposite, but it's really a false choice because they're not opposites, right? Like conservatism and American or Western liberalism and Western conservatism are not opposite. They're different, but they're not opposite, right? There's other things, and they both have plenty of wrong ideas on them, each of them. Similarly, we neither want our goals to be, or our overall culture to be, a rejection of what we were raised with. All that ends up being is you break out of one box, but you're still in a bigger box that you don't realize. It's invisible to you, right? Both conservatism and liberalism, for example, both take the violation of property rights to be normal, right, as a given. And then it's about they're just different philosophies on once government owns everything, including your body and all your money, then what do we do with that best? Conservatism might say, let's give more of that money back to people. Conservatism in practice still affirms that the government owns all money, but then they're like, we're letting you keep more of your own money. Obviously, if they affirm that it actually was your money, then they would shoot themselves for taking it or imprison themselves. They obviously don't believe that, or else they wouldn't take it in the first. They believe it's theirs, but then they believe in giving more to the people than liberals. So I prefer them, but it's still the wrong box. For both of them are in a false box overall, right? Very few people are in a box where they actually think that people can own property. Of course, everyone in certain circumstances will affirm that people own property, right? People don't think that it's okay to just burn down your neighbor's house, but then they have all kinds of beliefs where it's okay to take people's property, greater good, and so, or just government is allowed to. So you let things reveal themselves, and presumably you would want, the way that you can tell that physique matters is like one of the easy ways to figure to start to understand something is you go to extreme, right? What if your physique was extraordinarily bad? Would that be bad as loaded? But what if you're 500 pounds and it hurt to move, or it was very difficult to move? And you had very low energy and it was expensive to feed yourself. Then that's obviously suboptimal, right? Now, on the other extreme, if you had like a perfect physique versus just a generally quite healthy physique, when I say perfect, I don't necessarily mean the one that would lead to the most longevity. We don't even know that very well. And even if it the right physique should still be a fat path that should be fairly easy to maintain, right? And pleasurable. And so somewhere in there you would want, right? You'd want to find that fat path with general health and physique and talented skill, right? You either need to find a way to live without money at all, or you want to find a way where there's a difference between what you can make and do and what other people value, like how easy and cheap it is for you to make or do something versus how people value it. If you can make or do something cheaper to yourself than the money people will pay you, then that's how you make money. At least for that reason, your talents and skills matter for regarding money. And if there's any other reasons why they would matter, perhaps your skill with being physically intimate with someone is relevant to a relationship. which would make that skill relevant, right? But that those would all reveal themselves. They wouldn't be just imposed upon you, right? So you don't reject that those things matter, nor do you accept that they matter, but you look to reveal what matters. And there's a bunch of replies. Oh, Matt says, I don't know if David would agree. There's a reply to what Bryce said. I do not know if David would agree, but success is not universal. Success should differ for each individual, however they define it. Here's what I would say, Matt, is I wouldn't say that success is how you define it. I would say success would be for a particular person would be something revealed, that there's a real target. There's really things that you can do and create and so forth, and relationships that you can make that'll lead to good for yourself and others. And that's not just how you define it. It's based on that reality that would reveal it. Success would be finding the seed and then master that, leading it to fruition and so forth, for individual relationships, for skills, for endeavors, and so forth. And that ultimately, of course, be what leads to goodness, which is in your experience, your conscious experience for yourself and other people. And that would be success for a particular person. You're welcome, Matt. You said, thanks for the clarity. Peter said, how is understanding stored and accessed? Are there mind content that are based on association and separate from the world? I might put this one off. I think for starters, as a seed, it's enough to know that clearly it's the case that understanding something that matters, that's important and can lead to good, or that is having an impact and is causing bad right now, right, with a contradiction, that even a bit of a fuzzy sense of what it means to understand something, it's better to understand something than not. And once you do understand something, then typically that can be stored to some degree. Now, if you have a breakthrough of understanding and then you have a memory that happened, but you can't remember what it was, then that also can be a seed and an anomaly and so forth, where you can say, all right, wow, sometimes I'll have an insight, but then I'll forget it. So I might want to write it down in a place where I can review it. I might want to make sure I build on it properly. And so you can start to, this is a good question for a seed to build a framework for answering this for yourself. And then getting a more of a sense of it. It's something that I think about to some degree, but I could go on about this answer, but I might put some more thought into it myself. Can I experience contents in my consciousness screen without my mind being involved as a reason? Probably not, but there'll be some reason, right? Overall, our mind is going to be a critical part of our consciousness screen. Here's a way to look at it, Peter, is that if it was the case that you had no power, no ability to do something as a conscious being that is going to impact your consciousness, either the goodness that you experience in your consciousness screen overall or in the future or whatever, then everything would be meaningless, literally, right? There would be nothing connected to you that would affect your goodness. That's obviously not the case. So also it's the case that goodness is not totally determined by you, at least in the short term, at least now, right? So there's factors from outside your mind that play a part in your conscious screen. And there's factors from your mind stores your mind. One of the factors, what you can do consciously result in an increase in understanding, an increase in clarity. So your mind will have better ideas as you turn on your light, right? As you seek understanding, and then it'll get better. So some of the details may or may not be fuzzy, but when you get to the kind of the heart of it, when you ask, can there be parts of your consciousness screen that your mind has nothing to do with? If that was the case, then again, it would rob a certain meaning and power from you. But on the other hand, it's like your mind mixes with things outside factors, and your mind itself is an outside factor in the moment, right? Your mind currently, at its current configuration, the beliefs, your mental model, memories, and so forth, your mind came from external factors and then plus whatever seeking of goodness and understanding that you turned on consciously, right? And so basically it's luck plus you exercising your actual free will, your real power to seek understanding. And so what we want to do is understand that better. We want to understand about understanding better, which you're doing. You're asking me about. You said is understanding based on our mind in a sort of modification. When you seek understanding, your mind will have better ideas in it. Another way that you can think of understanding, knowing, checking ideas to see if they match, is something that I think you need to be involved with consciously at any moment. But the level of correctness of ideas, the level of the amount of goodness, relative goodness that the ideas in your mind are going to lead to is going to go up as you seek understanding. But seeking understanding will be something you turn on and you do consciously. And then that'll lead your mind to have better ideas in it. And then your mind is probably always involved as part of what you're aware of, what you experience, as is the environment. That's a starter for now. I don't want to get people too blown out, but it's always good to touch on that. It's great questions, great stuff to inquire about, very close to the heart of what really matters. So I appreciate that. Can you start a recommendation of books? I've recommended books. I do it all the time. I just recommended one today. Eat bacon, don't jog. I previously recommended the 10 Commandments. Let me just remind myself the title of that book. The Lost Art of Closing. I recommended Subliminal, the book Subliminal. How Thinking Fast and Slow, Inevitable Illusions. David Gemmell is a fiction writer, in my opinion, by far the best writer. I feel like there was one other thing I was thinking of, but I'm blanking on now. So true about what we learned in school, said Faith. Posting the members area. Yeah, I may do that. Thank you, Bryce. I appreciate that. Good thing to ask. Mike said, I got called away to an important meeting. I'm listening now, but I'll have to leave for a bit shortly. Great. Yeah, I knew you had an important thing today. Haha, I wish I was in Southern California. Yeah, it's cold. Wish I hadn't missed 2 hours. That's why I'd be Mike said. Bryce says, by the way, David, to what extent do you think a climate or region affects a personality or mindset? I feel like people in Chicago are reclusive because of the awful climate we have. I wonder if this is a contributor to me being introverted. I do think that there's like ripple effects based on various things, but the ripple effects can be complex. For example, in some of the most choice places to live, like California, there's more incentive for people who want to be greedy and control others to go there and take it over. Right. So there's that. There's Malcolm Gladwell pointed out something I found pretty fascinating, which is that if you look at the grain that's grown in different parts of the world, it becomes quite relevant for how people look at labor. There wasn't slavery, as far as I understand. Again, I could always be wrong about little things like this. If I read something, I remember something wrong, or my source was off. But there wasn't slavery in China because the way that rice is grown, it isn't going to be harvested very well by slaves. Whereas something like obviously cotton or perhaps wheat, I'm not sure, it might not be. Wheat might be more of a frontier thing, who knows, might be more, or it might be, I can't remember with that. But certain crops are more liable for things like slavery, or of course sources like diamonds or gold, or the discovering rubber plants in the Amazon I was reading recently caused the indigenous population to be killed by disease and slavery, and they were all enslaved by the Europeans back hundreds of years ago. So things like that, there's kind of complex factors. It could be something as simple as it's cold out, but on the other hand, it's cold in Russia, but they have a great situation where there's all kinds of problems with Russian culture, and almost because people are poor, they have these apartment complexes that the government built, and they were all planned, and there's a big recreation place where all the kids go out, which you don't have, like where I live, which is sad. There's not like a recreation place where all the kids are playing. There's all these activities and everything that kids are going to every second, and it's hard to have much in terms of just going outside and playing with kids. So it's just complex factors that go in. Faith said, I absolutely want to get to 3. Told you that. Yeah, and I want to get to 3 too. I love getting to mastery. But the more you internalize this, and I think you mean this, Faith, but the more you internalize the mastery process, and the more you master the feeling, like it's integrated and you feel it, the more that you feel like the fastest route to getting and staying at 3 and having lots of 3, including money or whatever, is to grow the seed into the trunk and branches, and then the leaves come from there. Even details, I've said this before in different contexts, but originally, if you're doing the mastery process, or even if the funny thing about the mastery process is you can only fool and fake that you did it if you didn't do it. You can't actually skip to number 3 through some better process. That would be a better process. If you could just start at number 3 and be done. So any idea that you can just skip there, but it's false. But details, the original point that is used by your mind, if you don't block it, or get in the way is it's either used to form a framework, which isn't really, there's not a metaphor there. The plant metaphor kind of breaks down. Even with like one of my webinars, if I'm talking about something that would be a new framework for you, then the details I give, they won't be remembered in the same way. They're used to wonder about or ask questions or to help form a general sense of the framework. And that's why listening multiple times works well with my webinars, is because I'm typically building a new framework for you. And I'm typically starting with an anomaly that people haven't really focused on much and starting from scratch, right? Alan said I had logon problems that came on late. Does fat stand for something? No, no. I just had to think of a word for it. What do you call that path that I just found? And it was quite ironic because then just today, after I'd already come up with that name, I picked up this book that's all about reading fat for dealing with the thing that I'm trying to figure out now about physique, health, and weight loss and so forth. And ironically, apparently the best diet is one that's mostly fat. Obviously, you don't want like trans fat and too much. It talks about you don't want too much omega 3s versus omega 6. You don't want too much omega 6 versus omega 3. You have to watch the ratio a bit. So it's not like just any fat all the time, but still. So, but I took that as a sign that I had named it right. It's a perfect example. The fat path is the actual fat path, presuming it's correct leading. But it's like fat because it's, oh, have you ever heard like in baseball, like a fat curveball where it's like just sitting there, it's easy. You just hit it easily. It was a bad, or a fat pitch means one that's like easy and easy to hit. So it's like actually something that's easy to stay on there, easy to hit. So I'm using fat in a fun way. Just curious, if you wanted to catch up with this series, would you recommend going through all the series since I missed snippets here and there? It depends. If you're trying to get my law of application training, then you can mostly listen to number 2 and then skip to the Ragnarok series. I would replay this Ragnarok series a lot. Probably. David, speed reading Facebook. Close to releasing, Mike Broadwell says, close to releasing my context-based health program, very much building it around LOI and law of application, right? The overall name for my training. And removing failure conditions will send you access soon if you think. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And I appreciate how you've been so much of a part of this from the beginning, from years ago. John said, I love your stuff, David, on the multiple angles. I've consolidated a list of questions that I think are multiple angles on the right process. And that gives me a good amount of perspective when solving things now. What are the highest impact failure conditions I can remove to help me win? I just glanced at how many people are on, and we have the same people amount on, like that were on for pretty much fairly early on. It grows for a little bit in the first 15 minutes, but that's amazing. Yeah, usually it went first. It's not even the case, but usually keep people pretty well. But anyway, it's pretty amazing. Anyhow, so here are some of the questions. What are the highest impact failure conditions I can remove to help me win? Look for false certainty. Look for the rushing, wanting to be right already, and look for the nearness. And that, again, that relates to the rushing. Pretty much everything related to nearness and association, like pulling at analogy, sticking by analogy, which all again relates to nearness, wanting to do things fast. So by associating the way that our brain thinks by analogous, it's like it tries to just decide that something from your past or your memory or an existing framework is the right thing to use now, just like with sales letters, like or a sales pitch. If it just imports it, or thinking that what worked yesterday with your significant other is going to be just the right thing today. But today is a fresh day. So you want to take a look at their moods, their needs, their different contexts, right? And so forth. Thinking by association would be thinking that, oh, you liked it yesterday, or you were in this mood yesterday. Why are you in the same mood today? That's what I mean by association in an unhelpful way, like over-reliance on. Of course, you naturally think by association. That just has to be the case. But when you use it in the way that you shouldn't, then that's not good. Basically, it consists of thinking in an analogy is the thing that you're an analogy, but an analogy is different, right? Yesterday is different than today. It might be analogous to today, but it's different. And so you need to do your best to look at things with fresh eyes. So again, the highest impact failure conditions tend to be things related to mistaking nearness for importance and rushing and wanting to be right already, which is like nearness, being in a rush. What are the highest impact success conditions I could promote to help me win? I don't know if this sounds generic, but seeking understanding was the thing that kind of measuring progress by gaining understanding. The more things that are the most important success conditions are things that are constantly involved with what you're doing. Understanding relationships, which helps to understand like the mind in a practical way, like I'd often talk about. Understanding something like respect, which doesn't mean like obeying someone or praising someone, but treating them as equal, right? Treating their time as equally valuable and so forth. Not necessarily monetarily as valuable, but in a certain way. I've talked about like, if you agree to meet someone for coffee, regardless of forget about paying money one way or the other, then being late is an example of not respecting their time. And someone might intentionally be late to emphasize status, right? That's where status is at odds with respect, right? Understanding about status and how that interferes with relationships is a high impact thing because relationships are obviously a massive part of your life, business and personal. And so understanding them is a big deal. The status thing is a big deal for that. And respect ties in with that. The mind, as I said, money, things that help you to get money under control in your life, where it's not taking over, needs a thing to take over, right? Your life. You want to have a healthy respect for what it does do, right? But then understand how it's made, right? Which involves, I've talked about product, traffic, and conversion. Today, I expanded on that, where I said that you could think of traffic as relationship, both starting in a relationship and having an ongoing relationship. You could think of conversion and sales as helping someone make a decision, which is best done. The better your relationship, the more you can communicate with someone, right? Which is the traffic part. But I like to think of his relationship better now, including initiating the relationship. Then that'll help you communicate more so you can give your things that'll help them with the decision. And then expand it upon product today by saying that you combine a product and a service into one whole thing that is also to get someone a result. That result is like I talk about vision and justification for the sales process. That result is like the vision, and the product and service is like the justification. So those are some examples of some hard hitting topics that are relevant and some sub things within each of those, right? I said money, but then I said product, traffic, conversion. And then I expanded upon that to help you understand money, relationships, right? And learning, again, the mind, goal, achievement in general, the fat path and mastery, right? All of these things are things that have a great impact because they're overall frames within which the smaller things in your life, so to speak, operate within. Oh, and being at peace with yourself, right? Dissolving the conditions of fear, guilt, shame, stress, things like that I talked about. I talked about doing that by understanding progress and your relationship with progress and having it understood properly and in a way that you're never stuck. Then he asks, sorry, I don't have to call you he. John asks, what other methods and actions can I take to help further build understanding? I like investigating cognitive illusions, like I've talked about, the book Inevitable Illusions, Thinking Fast and Slow. I said Subliminal, The Wisest Person in the Room. Some of Malcolm Gladwell's stuff touches on it sometimes. Things like that I find quite interesting and can find them relevant to help further build understanding. Points out a number of anomalies. I like to see places where my brain will predictably go wrong by default. I'm not trying to prove that I'm smart. I don't look at those and just memorize the answers to the cognitive illusion, so to speak, so that I feel superior. Instead, I'm just trying to hunt down mistakes that my brain's going to make and get my mind to be better. I'm not doing it to be superior. The minute you want to be superior, then you're trying to already be right, and then you've cut yourself off from further improvement. Next one is, what other questions can I ask that will help give me a different angle on this situation or challenge? One helpful thing is the 4 perspectives, which I'll just say that quickly, is top-down thinking, bottom-up thinking, front to back, and back to front. If you're solving a maze, then top-down is like getting looking at the whole picture, getting a lay of the land. Bottom-up thinking is like crossing off dead ends. If you're making a business plan, right, then getting a kind of an overview of things. A list of what resource you have at your disposal is like top-down. It's not just the whole picture. It's like accumulating a list of resources that you have or potentially have, what you're working with. A bottom-up thinking is, what could go wrong? What are things I want to avoid? What have I tried in the past that hasn't worked? And then front to back is step by step, finding recipe, following it, starting where you're at and going one step at a time, trying to basically smash your way through obstacles or climb over it. Reverse thinking is like reverse engineering. Back to front thinking, it's different than bottom up. Back to front thinking is like reverse engineering, starting at the inside of the maze and working back out. It basically front to back, going forwards and starting from going backwards from the end. They help you get unstuck in either direction. Neither one's superior to the other. you probably just start with front to back. Just try to start where you're at and go to the end. But when you start to get stuck that way, then try reverse thinking. So those 4 perspectives help you see things from different angles, attack a problem from different angles. And I've found that to be quite helpful. It's so intuitive for me now. I hardly think about doing it consciously, but I worked on that and ingrained it in my mind years ago. Fletch said, since David shared 4 perspectives with me, I keep it in mind when I do training and webinars to try to hit those 4 perspectives. Yeah, it's really good when you're teaching to use as well. Awesome, Fletch. Thank you. Next question. How can I further rig the game in my favor? And at some point, I might not answer all these right now. We're almost out of time. But how can I further rig the game in my favor so that it's inevitable I win? Good question. And I would just ask, that's like a rephrase in a sense of the Ragnarok issue of how do I remove failure conditions, attending to removing failure conditions until you win. As long as you rigging the game involves adding success conditions and removing failure conditions, but start by focusing on impact, real importance, right? Because like you can supposedly add success conditions or remove failure conditions and never get to the win if you ignore impact, right? If you're driving, my mental illustration is if you can drive on one island, and if your destination is on a different island, you'll never get there. And you can pave the road better, you can remove potholes and so forth. You're still not going to get to a place in a different continent, different island, I should say, if you're in the wrong frame. If you pay attention to importance, you'll ultimately never get stuck in situations and stuff like that. Right? At some point, you'll realize you're on the wrong island. Keep looking at import and frames, right? The meta, the context. It's only getting blinded by nearness that would have someone go on forever thinking that they're making progress, but stuck on the wrong island. Where is the blurriness and or resistance in this situation? Oh, and some of these are questions you can ask yourself. I bet they're not even questions you're asking me now that I think about it. Yeah, so great. You're right. So then you're here, particularly ones you can ask yourself. Excellent. Thanks, guys. Guys, you can refer to this and it can be very helpful for you if you're looking for some seed to help you, or a starting point for a framework to build a framework, which is like a seed. Like you might have an initial seed, but then if you're looking for like sprouting points for your framework, then these are great. What John Victoria wrote here. Thanks, John, for sharing that. When I sneezed back then, Gesundheit. Okay, I'll have to wrap things up pretty fast. You missed the fat path concept? Oh, you must have come pretty late, right? Which I don't mind. I thought you seemed like you were here the whole time. But maybe, anyway, yeah, just on the replay, of course. Fate says for diet, people really have to try things out. Oh, you were here for it, but it didn't quite make sense. I see. Okay, yeah, the replay, hopefully it'll finish making sense. And just work out what has to be right for yourself. I think I've given you enough of at least a seed. So I've probably given you a framework and a bunch of details. But you don't need the framework and details. If you have a seed, you can do the rest always in life. So I've for sure given you a seed if you are not going to marginalize and delete and forget about it on this webinar, no matter what. And it's a great seed. So go from there and you'll be all set. Just always constantly have that attitude of taking responsibility for building the framework yourself, because you have to anyway. No matter what I give you, I can't give you a framework ever. I can make it a lot like kind of easier or faster for you to assimilate, like figure out the framework, depending on both how good a job I do in a vacuum and then also just on the intersection between where you're at in your mind and my mind, which doesn't have to do with who's better or whether you're good or bad, but also just literal communication, someone could not speak English as well, for example, and that wouldn't be less enlightened. It would just be a relative lack of communication. You're welcome, Bryce. She says, thank you for building up the environment and letting concepts reveal themselves. This is why a particular diet usually only works for roughly a third of the people who try it. Oh, very interesting. So it's a good example of not being able to jump to 3, but having to test it and build a framework for yourself. That's a great thought. I like that a lot, of where I agree. And it's a good warning for myself and others, is that don't think that, you've gotten it and that you've even jumping to where you think you've gotten the framework when you haven't. But it's certainly part of the process of a framework is you look at, not depending on the situation, but one valid process is to test out one potential framework, either that you come up with yourself or that you read. And then when you test something, it doesn't mean that if it fits or seems to work. So for example, there's a good example. Suppose I was one of the 1/3, let's stipulate, which may or may not be correct, of course. Let's stipulate that the book, Eat Bacon, Don't Jog, works for 1/3 of the people. I don't necessarily even think that's the case, right? Probably insulin is relevant for everyone, but it's also very possible that it will work for only a segment of the population, including maybe a third. So let's stipulate that it'll work for a third. Then let's suppose I try it and it works for me. If I have the mistaken idea of how fitting is the same as matching, then I would say, oh yeah, see, this works, right? Something could fit without it matching, like of course someone else or everyone, right? Something can fit, and then the part that right, you can fit a key in a lock that has a lot of stuff on the end of the key, all kinds of decoration and stuff, and that the fact it fits in a lock doesn't tell you anything about the rest of it. So if one particular die had fit in my lock, so to speak, then it wouldn't mean that it matched for someone else, right? Just the same way I say I'm an analogy for another person. In other words, there's things that are similar about me and anyone else, given that we're both humans, and there's things that are different. And if we don't know what exactly is similar and different, then we shouldn't mistake the analogy for a match. So when you try it and see if it's correct, you can try and see if it fits, but you can't try something to see if it matches. To see if something matches, you would have to have full knowledge of both sides of what supposedly match. Sometimes all you need is just something to fit for you, right? But if I was trying to figure out diet for everybody, then it wouldn't be enough to have something work for me. I need something that somehow I was able to figure it out that in a way that it would match everyone. So if that was even possible. Thank you, Faith. That was awesome. Fletch says, in a certain sense, step one about the mastery process was where my mind broke. I gained a foothold of that and couldn't let go of a contradiction I was holding. I continued to learn more and more from webinars and training as the framework was built. Great. So you guys, you can read what Fletch wrote. I'm going to have to wrap things up. But you can read what Fletch wrote, and it's really insightful and can help you. Matt agreed, and you can read his response. It's awesome. And I appreciate, Matt, what you're saying about what I've delivered in LOI and Alchemy and Ragnarok webinars is invaluable. Then you appreciate it more over time. That's awesome. Great encouragement for other people. Thank you. I'm stuck on number 2. I'm struggling, but I appreciate your lesson. Yeah. And you might be stuck at number 2. You're never stuck at number 2 if you really understand this right. You might be seeking to understand number 2 better, or you might be at the number 2 phase of framework and so forth with a particular endeavor. But I think there's an anomaly somewhere. You're misinterpreting something, so go back through and think about it. If you think that you're stuck on number 2, like in general, you may in the past have done one of the things I've talked about where you block yourself with the number 2. Oh, and then Camila said, got it, take action. Okay, great. So this post worked on itself, and Fletch wrote something, so that was great. Lots of great stuff still left in this post you guys can read. One of the things you guys might want to do, including I can tell this myself, is not just review the replays, but take a look at what some people say, because there's great stuff in here. Great. William Smith says good water should be a huge part of your diet. Interesting. Yeah, actually, my wife recently got different filters that help put, was it more negative ions or something like that, or polarity into the water. She read was important. Yeah, there's so much with health. I agree. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But anyhow. But I've seen this in other places in life. Once I focus on it with the mastery process, you're not in a rush, but you expect the fat path. You're not reacting to something else. You're not trying to prove that you're right, not trying to prove that you're smarter than other people. Then the fat path typically reveals itself. Michael Gagnon writes, I feel lighter after your whole course, David. The fat path is a good conclusion. Yeah, to the series. Excellent. As an analogy, storing fat is accumulating failure conditions and burning it out and slowing down. Eating carbs is removing failure conditions. In the case of this book, I'm not saying it's true overall with everyone or science, but the eating carbs actually was detrimental. It caused fat to be stored by having your body produce insulin, he explains, just in case anyone trying to the science of the thing itself. Also, seeing success as a follow-up of small breakthroughs has helped me much. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, the more you can see progress properly, it's just such a difference. Your whole life just so easy and wonderful, relatively speaking, at least. And then it's on an upward spiral, right? The fat path. On the fat path, remember, you're paying attention. You're still paying attention. You're still competent. It's not automated, but it's easy because you can pay attention to be competent. So that's good. Another Ragnarok gift. Happy New Year. Oh, anti-fragile, right. That's a good thing to recommend. And then I recommended Enjoy Incorporated. I've also recommended. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Fruitfully active trajectory. Thanks, Alan. Alan's the one that asked about the metaphor before, the acronym of fat. Excellent. We can have a fat contest for who can make the best acronym, but that's up there. That might win. Matt says, what was the name of the author of fiction that you mentioned earlier? David Gamel. Yes. You have it accurate, and you'll love the books. If you read a book of his and you don't love it, then just read another one. You probably like them all, but I'm just saying he's written so many great ones. That's great. 10 million, he said 10 million. $10 million strikes again. Thank you. You're saying this is worth $10 million for this webinar. I love or at least for this series. I love the way you've continued to distill this for yourself and subsequently for the, yeah, mastery process, right? I don't just stop at the framework for myself. I'm still, and I don't stop. I don't think I have all the framework, right? I'm always, oh, the mastery process. This is a good way to, good thing I'm glad I'm pointing this out before we're done. It isn't like you go 1, 2, 3, done. It's more like 1, and then especially 2 and 3 kind of feedback to each other. You'll accumulate some details that might lead to more questions, which it builds framework, and that might lead to more details. And I should have pointed that out, but now I am. So it's not 1, 2, 3 done. Mastery, however, can be a threshold. Some people say, oh, I've never mastered something. If we understand winning is getting over a threshold, you can also understand mastery as when the path is fat for you regarding a certain thing. A carpenter that was trying to appear, or maybe they could really believe this, might say, oh, I've never mastered carpentry. But actually, if he can build what he needs to build without screwing up and building it well for people where it works well for them and lasts for a good amount of time, then that's over a threshold. He's made the path fat. We can define mastery in that way, and then we can master something and not just have the canard, the throwaway line, oh, I've never mastered anything. What I mean is like, I've done well, but you never achieve mastery. You always get better. The problem with that is it ignores importance. It ignores alternative use of resources. And it can even ignore the driving in San Francisco. Maybe you keep trying to improve and you end up going backwards, right? Possibly, right? That may not happen it can happen in some areas of life. So mastery really is a thresholdish type of thing, presumably, where like if you could drive in such a way that's just safe, then speaking, then you've mastered it. You don't have to be even better than that for whatever you normally do when you're driving. QSB, quality site base, which is an SEO concept Fletch is teaching, and dimensionality flow together nicely. Thank you, Fletch. Appreciate you doing that. Another great Webby, David. You're welcome. You're welcome, Peter. Yeah, I'll end it right now. Fantastic fat feast, David. Thank you so much. You're welcome, Megan. Great webinar, which expands my mind. Thank you, David. You're welcome, Susanna. Ellen says, thanks, David. Another excellent Webby. Hashtag fat path. Hashtag awesome. Great. John says, thank you, David. You're the bomb, changing our lives one question angle at a time. You're welcome, John. Mike says, thanks for pioneering the fat path for us. Excellent. You'll never see fat again without thinking of me. Right? But do you think this will be seared in your mind forever? This fat path, you can't unthink it, can't unsee it, right? I don't always guarantee that forever, but I think this time it'll change us forever. You're welcome, Robert, for another mind-blowing webinar and for taking the time to answer so many questions. It means a lot. You're welcome, Robert. Hashtag fat path. Great, so people can search for hashtag fat path, and definitely this post will come back up. Brian says, incredibly clear distinctions, David. Thank you for your perseverance to bring this all to us. It's such a positive ripple effect. Yeah, and hey, you know what? This is also the third of 3, right? So we're much farther along where you're going to get some closure and some details that'll fit in better, right? It ends up being rewarding to follow it through, but also remember to give the glory to the other webinars that we put in, which people appreciated. It's been great the whole time with the feedback or with the Ragnarok stuff. But even before that, with Dimensionality, even before that, with the Apotheosis and Crushing the Game webinars, it all set the stage for this, right? Including for myself, just going through it all to get to where we're at. You're welcome, Faith. Looking forward to the replay. I always get more the second time. Exactly, right? Which goes right along with the mastery process. Okay, guys. Awesome stuff. I appreciate you so much. Appreciate all the discussion, which is always critical. And just showing up as a warm body on the webinar numbers. It's always nice to have at least a decent amount of people on here. And so I appreciate you coming online. I will talk to you guys soon. I'm not sure in January when, if I'll be doing webinars each week or when, but I will always be back. I might look to do some stuff on affiliate marketing and website conversion, especially getting you guys on the path with that for those who want it. Not sure how big the numbers are for people that want that. Although probably a lot of people want to come on because I'm doing a webinar and just hear about it. I might look to cover that. You guys can let me know if that's interesting to you. All right. Have a wonderful New Year's and happy holidays. And I hope that you already had a Merry Christmas and happy Hanukkah if you want to hear that or whatever else.